Okay, there we go. There's no way. It always does that in the analytics. Like, I get connected, it automatically says, like, concurrent viewers 11. It'd be nice if we have that many, but calm down. I thought there was a bunch of people waiting, so maybe they just had the tab open. Just gonna give it a minute or two to see who tunes in. Bonjour, Telemé. Nice to see you again. I have my assistant in the chat. Did you, by any chance, get to watch to pre-watch that video too, or read? Oh, well, you did read the transcript at random, and then you immediately got on one of the spots that is pretty relevant to one of my main points I'm going to be making today. Also, no background music this time, because it turns out that the license I have for Epidemic Sound is only for the main gaming channel, so when I started playing that music on this channel, it got the other live demonetized. Shortcut is here too. Hey, man! It's nice to see you here, Shortcut. I didn't think you were also into my political stuff, because usually I see you faithfully in all my gaming streams. Didn't expect to see you here. This one was too long, even for reading. Yeah, I think this time I'm going to allow myself to skip ahead some of it. Depending on what's being said, you know, I don't want to be unfair, but it really comes down... well, we'll get to it in a second. But there's a couple of issues here. Okay, well, I see like 6 people in here. And it is 11:30, so I mean, we might as well get started now. Let me just set up a few things. I honestly think you should react to like 30 minutes of it here. Yeah, this is what I mean. Like, I am going to try to minimize it, considering that this is the same video and a lot of the same arguments are being brought up. Maybe also stuff like I addressed this argument in the other live. Yeah, something like that, but we'll see, because the angle from which this other guy comes in is a little different. Anyway. Okay, so quick recap, everybody. Okay, here I am. So, a year ago, I make a video on MGTOW where I try to genuinely address some of the arguments I've heard from MGTOW, try to address them fairly, to represent them accurately, and then I give a critique. You know, I give my perspective, I try and give an analysis, of, you know, what's going on in the topics we're talking about. And I do so, and this is really important to say, like, while I do consider myself a feminist, I'm also just really talking about it from a leftist perspective, and this is going to be important. So anyway, because of like the latest push in the algorithm that I got from my Metatron video, I guess some Manosphere dudes with very small channel, basically as small as mine really, and very, very niche audiences, they stumbled on it, and now they're starting to make their own responses video. So first we covered, was it yesterday? Or the day before? I already forgot. There was this guy, City Crusher, Metatron Obsessed Guy Gets Cool on Men's Issues. We went over it in a previous live stream, so I'm not going to again. However, anyone who saw this live stream, and eventually I'll make like a live clip, I'll clip it out and make a proper video out of it, but like every single time I was about to bring like an actual resource or argument, like he actually like skipped it, and you can see him, and it was funny. He also made some particularly outrageous arguments. One time when we were talking about the homelessness issue, it was on Monday, thank you. When we were talking about like the homelessness issue, he argued at some point that, you know, actually homeless women have it easier because they can at least sell their bodies, which is a really weird thing to say, obviously for anyone that's not in that bubble. He also brought up, like in terms of circumcision, he brought up the argument that young men, boys, infants, I guess, were being circumcised in the Victorian era to prevent them from masturbating. And then when he was talking about the reasons men are being circumcised today, he brought that reason up again, even though it was like 200 years ago. It's not really relevant anymore. It was weird. But anyway, another guy from that niche talked to me. This is A Shield for Men. And yesterday I wrote to him like the same comment I did with City Crusher, where I asked him if he was willing to discuss some of these issues. I don't know if he responded to my last one. Let's see. No, he still didn't. We got into a beef this morning, basically because like he was really hammering hard on like my views on circumcision, but he's pretty much doing the same mistake that the other guy did, which is that he's coming in hard, like really to fight on the circumcision issue, but like completely missing my point that I was making in the video. So anyway, I watched your video after that live and realized someone I know in real life is in that rabbit hole. I hope I can help him. It is really unhealthy and sad. Yeah, I can't tell you, I can't give you any strategies for that, like de-radicalization, getting people out of these bubbles, like that's a bit like past me. What I will say broadly, and this is something that I want to say sincerely to both this guy that we're going to be reacting to, A Shield for Man, and City Crusher. I understand that you guys are in your own bubbles. I understand that you guys are like deeply invested in your own movement. But you also need, at least I strongly encourage you to take the videos and their intent for what they are. You know, you can call me a male feminist that is fundamentally part of a hate movement, and you can associate me with all the most extreme examples of feminism, of radicalism that you can think of. But you really need to take into account like what I'm trying to do with this video. What I was trying to do with the video, even if we don't agree, what I was trying to do is actually address the arguments fairly. Like I went out of my way to try and make sure that the arguments that I'm talking about, that I really understand them, that I really understand the perspective behind it before bringing up my own arguments. It's a bit disappointing that you guys would not at least try to approach my video as it was done the exact same way. You're not coming in trying to understand my criticisms. You're just coming in looking to destroy and interpret me in the least charitable way. I really do think you're doing that because I generally think like, even if you don't think I'm right on some of the things I say, like, you're not even addressing my arguments properly. Like, you misinterpret or purposefully twist, I don't know, a lot of the things I say, and you know, I'm all for having a conversation, but in the case of City Crusher, he straight up said that no data I have will ever be acceptable because he thinks I'm just part of a movement. That could just be cope. I think it actually just cope. I think that he's hiding. If you think my arguments are bad, you shouldn't just have to say they're bad. You should probably be able to destroy them comfortably, especially for a live conversation. To Shield for Man's credit, he did say in the comments that he would be willing to talk to me, especially when it comes to circumcision. But even then, the problem I'm seeing here is that he seems to still be not so much discussing my arguments, but what he thinks my arguments on circumcision are. And anyway, we'll get into it. So, sorry, keep freaking my camera. So this is the video. I watched it in two parts. I watched it last night. I had a moment at work when I was back in the office doing paperwork, and I could just listen to it, and then I listened to the other half this morning. I'm going to accelerate it a little bit because the guy is very slow-paced. The problem is that he also kind of accelerates my own playback in the video, so I'm going to end up talking really fast in my video. I also have my own original video open in case I need to refer it, and that's it. So let's get to it. Response to a response again, like. And here I am. This is my live stream from Monday, by the way.
Hello and welcome. Today is another good day where I absolutely destroy a male feminist. So yeah, so City Crusher made this video against a guy called Do Get Out. This guy is apparently a male feminist. And now he has made this response to City Crusher's response. This live stream here, Manosphere Weirdo destroyed me. Now I'm gonna only respond to the video City Crusher responded to, which was about MGTOW and men's issues and so on and so forth, where Duke It Out spouted a bunch of nonsense, okay? And I basically, like, address 4 parts of that video. I will not go through the whole video because it's 1 hour long. And I'm not gonna go through this live stream here either, because it's 3 hours long and that would take too much time. However, what I'm going to do is, what I'm basically going to do is comment quickly on his so-called response to City Crusher bringing up the White Feather campaign, right? So let's hear this quickly.
So the government started doing conscription, the government lowered the enlisting age, and the government started the White Feather campaign. Who was running the government?
Look how smug this guy is, how he thinks he's making a good point here. Oh, the White Feather campaign? As conscription was actually done by the government, which was, of course, made up of men, and therefore it's men's fault. And, oh, the White Feather campaign, the idea for that was created by some admiral, some Charles Penrose Fitzgerald. Wow, amazing. Except that we already agree that men can also discriminate against other men. So all this guy just did was knocking down a straw man. Okay?
Okay, I understand that you acknowledge that other people, that men were also part of that campaign. But I think it's pretty important. The context in which City Crusher brings it up is to say that, like, this is how women have oppressed men. But it's like, if it's not exclusively women doing it, then is it really something you can blame exclusively on women then? Like, when you're talking about the White Feather campaign, you're talking about women shaming men, and you use this as a way of women, like, using their power to oppress men. Like, I get that, but if other men were also involved in that campaign, in fact started it, then it kind of takes away from the argument, is all I'm saying.
That's number one. Number two, it is still totally valid to bring up the White Feather campaign in order to show how women also contribute to male oppression. Okay?
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but in the context of this specific situation, the problem is that if you're looking at, like, the timeline in the history of that campaign, there's a whole bunch of things that lead up to men being sent in a war to die. Okay? We agree with that. The problem is that in the way City Crusher is bringing it up, he's trying to omit that part. Women did not declare, were not in positions of power to declare war. Women were not in a position of power to declare conscription. And women were not in a position to go to war themselves, even if they wanted to help their country. This is also something else that you can read when you go, like, further down, and it explains that the feminists of the time, the suffragettes and whatever, they actually put their own struggle for liberation on pause during World War I to instead focus on what they can do to help the country. So don't get me wrong, like, shaming men into joining the war, like, totally bad. But I'm just saying, if it's not coming exclusively from women, and you're talking about how they can also be part of men's oppression, that implies by itself that men are also oppressing themselves. The thing is that men didn't even see war as a bad thing. They saw it as a cool privilege to deny to women. Yeah, I would have to expand a lot more on that, but there is an element, like, this is a disconnect that there was, especially during World War I, but now we're getting sidetracked already, but I'll still engage in it. But yeah, there was an idea, especially during the first year of World War I, where it was kind of seen as, like, this really glorious thing, and, like, yay, like, we're going to go to war, we're going on an adventure, and then the moment the war got industrialized, that's when they started needing conscription, because men were just dying by the hundreds of thousands. But again, this is still in the context of a patriarchy in which men are expected to go to war and die, and that's one of the ways in which the patriarchy is oppressing men in this regard. And it's one of those instances in which you could say it benefited women, but then you take that out of the equation, and in pretty much every other situation at the time, women are going to be the one getting the bad deal of the patriarchy of the time. Anyway, I already made that point, and it was pretty clear. I think he's just trying to reemphasize the same thing. But again, like, the oppression is coming from where? The patriarchy, but you'll get into that too.
Okay. And the White Feather campaign was a campaign made up of women, a lot of women from all over the country, including feminist suffragettes, okay? Prominent feminist suffragettes? Or are you going to say, oh, these feminist suffragettes that are so revolutionary and, they are like fighting against the patriarchy and all that, all of a sudden they also work for the patriarchy simultaneously?
Yes. It is entirely possible. You can see many examples of that throughout history of people working against their own self-interest. I think you're German, Shit for Men. What do you make of the Polish Jewish police in the Warsaw Ghetto, like Jewish collaborators during World War II under Nazi Germany? There are countless periods in history where you'll see people actively working against their own self-interest or being even collaborators in some regards. We'll get into it because, like, one of the things he tries to do, and to an extent City Crusher was doing it too, is trying to compress every branches of feminism and every woman who's ever labeled themselves as a feminist, regardless of what their politics are, regardless of the time period or culture. They try and all put it into this one singular movement that stands for everything behind it and never, like, criticizes. There's never any internal conflicts. And this is one of those things that I would talk about personally, because when I consider myself a feminist, you think I consider myself a feminist in the same way that feminists 100 years ago would define themselves as feminists? Of course not. There are feminists 100 years ago who were also eugenics, who wanted feminism for white women, and, black women were still seen as inferior. There are a lot of instances like that, and suffragettes using their position within the patriarchy to shame men to serve the country, to me, that's completely ridiculous. I condemn it. But the only reason I'm arguing here is because, again, if you want to use this example to talk about women oppressing men, then you also need to take into account that most of the oppression that led to the White Feather Campaign was done by men in power, was done by the patriarchy, still. And you just gotta deal with that.
So these suffragettes, they're fighting against the patriarchy, quote unquote, but they also work for the patriarchy. Mm-hmm. How does this make any sense?
Okay, well, I just explained this. We're just going to move on.
You see how easy it is to debunk this clown. But anyway, let's go also show some other sources, right? So this is an anti-suffragette poster or pamphlet. It's a historical document. And the anti-suffragette movement was made up of a lot of women, majority-wise women, if I remember correctly. And they were against female suffrage because under male suffrage, women were exempt from military service. They saw that as a good thing. They were fighting against including women in the draft because getting drafted is not exactly a privilege. It is a burden, all right?
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things about the patriarchy is that what it's done consistently is portray men as the providers, the fighters, the protectors, the saviors, and it's portrayed women as subservient, as homemakers. So in that situation where you're talking about like male disposability and stuff like that, what we're talking about is the reason women are not getting drafted is because culturally they are seen as weak and needing protection. You can break down how that process came to be, and to be honest, like, it's going to be really complicated. This is not necessarily something that I'm going to break down now, but this is what I'm talking about. When it comes to this specific thing, I mean, I understand that he's making the same point, but I don't know. Husband must pay wife's bills, whether for the family or for her own personal expenses. Like, I don't know when this thing was. Special privileges New York women have suffered under male suffrage. That seems to be like a fairly old thing. I think he said it was a while ago. I'm not sure. But like, and this is in New York State, okay? It was illegal for women to have bank accounts while this was written. So it's not so much that men are obligated to pay. They're obligated to pay because women have no legal means to pay for themselves. Men have to take care of the woman because women have no real means of taking care of themselves. It says may own real and personal property and dispose of it or sell it without her husband's knowledge or consent. We can't get stuck like on every single thing, but I really find it stupid that it says like, this is a special privilege that women have. It's a privilege to be able to own your own house. It's kind of a weird framing for the start, isn't it? A special privilege? Why is it not just like a fundamental right? When they're talking about equal rights, that just means that now women can do it too, but it's still being framed as a special privilege? Are you for real? If husband fails to support wife, hold on. Husband must pay wife's bills, whether for the family. Again, if wife obtains divorce, husband must pay alimony. The reason it says that husband must pay alimony is because, again, in the patriarchy, women are expected to take care of the children. So if the children are still involved, and the mother is taking care of them, and that means that she has less time to work for herself, then yeah, it's a fair part of the deal, But here, this is where I would bring my own real, genuine feminist critique, and what I would tell you is that if it's the opposite, woman, the mother, should pay alimony to the dad if the dad is taking care of the children by himself full time. I would make that argument, and a lot of feminists would also make that argument. Anyway, this is already...
And women were contributing to men's burden. Okay, they didn't want to share that equally, right? Okay? As history has shown, even with female suffrage, there was still no mandatory draft for women, by the way. Then here's also a very good article showing all kinds of historical...
This is from nomormisandry.blogspot.com. Does that sound like a unbiased website? Oh, sorry. I'm just going to bring it down because he's done with me. No More Misandry. That's the website. Yeah, I'm sure it's very reliable. I'm sure it doesn't have a bias of its own at all.
Situations in which women have basically shamed men into fighting in the Civil War and Revolutionary Wars. It wasn't just the White Feather Campaign. That's not the only example. Okay? Here are all kinds of historical books and quotes that show this, right? For example, Undoing Glory, Constructions of Gender and Patriotism.
Okay, well, he's basically going to the same thing, like just another instance of women shaming men into war. Like, I already explained the dynamic behind that, and I already said that, like, on its own, like, I totally, like, condemn it. But I also just condemn, being drafted and conscripted, and I am generally anti-war. So it's not like there's a contradiction in my beliefs here anyway. I'm just, like, if you're going to bring up the draft to say that's an instance of male oppression, I would just tell you, yeah, I agree, let's end it. But I feel like a lot of these guys, I could be speculating a lot. I don't think I heard him actually say that. But I feel like a lot of these guys who bring up the draft, they don't have any real policies to solve it. They just want to be using it to complain that they're the ones who are oppressed. Because if that's not the case, like, why aren't they talking about, like, ending the draft? He will complain a lot in this video about instances where women could have been included in the draft and then feminists showed up to oppose it. And that's true. Why aren't you just opposing the draft instead of complaining about women opposing their own contribution? It's like you just want to, point out at their hypocrisy, but okay, what's your belief? Because I feel like a lot of these guys, if they had it their way, they would not end the draft. They would just make it happen to women also, just so when there's a war, they can fantasize themselves like looking over the battlefield with a bag of popcorn, so that when a woman struggles through like military training or military combat or whatever, they can just be like, you see, these women are weak. Like, I know they'll never actually say that, and it's totally possible I'm just making all of this up, but again, like, what I would like is some actual policies here. Do you want to abolish the draft? Yes or no? If it's yes, then great, we agree. That's what I want, and there's a lot of feminists who just want to end the draft also. Husbands were liable for his wife's necessaries under common law, but personal expenses weren't automatically his burden. The poster isn't fully accurate. Common law gave fathers absolute testamentary guardianship rights. They could appoint guardians overriding the mother. The 14th point is false too. Many other examples, but it's really a propaganda poster. No, it absolutely is a propaganda poster. Like, it literally says, like, don't vote for women's suffrage at the end. It's completely misframed. Anyway, so he's still just talking about that. Let's go forward.
Shun that. of men. Patriarchy, let's say, that made fun. It is the glue.
Oh yeah,
here
I
in
do
this
find that
sections.
funny.
It is total nonsense. I have made fun of this concept here in this post, this satirical post here. The patriarchy is the explanation for everything. It is like,
Yes, his approach to addressing the patriarchy is citing his own post, which he by himself is, by his own admission, is satirical. Also, is it? I'm not German. Is this 12 minutes? He posted that like right before recording the video, just so he could bring it up when making his video. Again, like I understand he doesn't believe the patriarchy to be a real thing. I mean, he's entitled to his opinion, but that's just if the opposite is that we live in a matriarchy, as City Crusher said, that is demonstrably false as well.
like the physics theory of everything, or the economic. It could be hiding under your bed. A man, where you can see that no matter what I give all kinds of examples where you can see that this is basically not a scientific theory.
Yeah, thanks, Good Love. So yeah, he made that post 12 minutes before posting just so we could bring it up in this video about me. Well, I appreciate the effort.
Because it's unfalsifiable. Because no matter what, you can just say patriarchy and it explains everything. You cannot falsify it. If men have disadvantages, that's patriarchy backfiring. If women have supposed disadvantages, that's also patriarchy. So no matter what, patriarchy. Totally unfalsifiable nonsense.
Okay, so the first thing we need to understand here is that patriarchy is one of the things that manifest in society, and sometimes, a lot of times it benefits men, and there are instances in which it oppresses men, it hurts men, and there are instances where it's going to quote-unquote benefit women, and it's also going to oppress them. Like, the idea generally is that patriarchy hurts both. When I make an argument, for example, about toxic masculinity, and we talk about the expectation in men to be always, tough and, always be strong and always be competitive and always be, strong and violent, a lot of men can't live up to those expectations, and the distress it causes them can be very bad for their health over their lifetime. This is a result of the patriarchy, and that's one of the ways in which patriarchy hurts men as well. So when we're talking about deconstructing the patriarchy, this is one of the ways in which we're talking about actually helping men. What is that guy's solution for the taboo of men being emotionally vulnerable? What is that guy's solution to end homelessness? What is that guy's solution to end men dying in wars? There's so many more things that are so much more complicated than that. Honestly, it depends on the nation, but drafts are a bit of a necessary option in my opinion. Well, I would, I don't really know. Like right now, like the example of the draft that is being used predominantly is the one in Ukraine, and in Ukraine, they let, the only time I actually hear that argument, it's from people in the Manosphere. So I don't actually know how true that is, but I would guess there's some truth to it. The idea that like men in Ukraine were conscripted into the armed forces and women were basically allowed to flee. Is that even a real thing? I mean, if it is, like, I'm also standing opposite to that. Like, if you're going to have a draft, make it equal. I'm absolutely 100% on board with that. If it's meant to serve the country, at the same time, the one thing we have to consider is that just because you are drafted, it doesn't mean that you are fit for duty. Usually when you're drafted, like, they do a quick medical check up on you to see, like, if you have any issues. And if, we find ourselves in the reality that the Manosphere constantly explains that men are on average stronger than women, then it would stand for reason that even if you have a draft that takes both men and women equally, well, you're still going to have men that are more just disproportionately drafted than women, but then they'd have to say that it's okay because men are stronger. Again, like, it's circular logic. It is, but both men and women fled. Okay, so both men and women fled the country. Okay. Well, again, like, I just gave my point on that.
Basically, as if women have zero influence on society and are just passive bystanders, except, of course...
Again, this is not an argument I've ever made. Women can be collaborationists in a patriarchy. Women can hold positions of power in a patriarchy. Women can be against feminism. There are women who are anti-feminists. And there are women who use whatever position they have to, to their advantage. Like, those sort of things happen, but it still doesn't override the broader problems at work here. Women aren't drafted in Ukraine, but the law was relaxed so they can join willingly. Okay, well, see, that's progress.
When they're doing something good, right? Men do everything evil, women do everything good.
No, that's, again, I never made that argument. It's a straw man.
It's almost as if this is like a conspiracy theory to villainize, to demonize men, and to put hyper agency on men. Yeah? But okay.
No, like, in my worldview, both men and women work together to make the world better, and that means they both work towards dismantling the patriarchy. Because it helps both of them. For women, it gives them more opportunities. It means they're not restricted to like the regular gender roles they would be associated with, and then it gives that same power to men. Both benefit here. This is also why, like, you know, they like to label me a male feminist and then say that I'm part of a hate movement. So basically, they think of me as like a traitor for men. Tell me what my positions are. Like, what are my views that are actually hurting men? Because all my policies are about trying to make the world as good as possible for everyone else. I'm not just a feminist, I'm a leftist. I approach this from many different angles.
Let's go to his actual video. Yeah, so
please.
this is the video I've talked about. MGTOW, how to trivialize men. And again, City Crusher already made a very good response to this video, but I think I just should also respond to this video, because why not? And by the way, City Crusher and I are not part of the quote-unquote manosphere, and we're not red pillars or whatever, right?
Okay, so just so we address this, because he's saying like, oh, you know, we're not red pillars, we are men's rights activists. I'm sure, you know, Wikipedia is a feminist platform, so they won't agree here, but the Manosphere is a very collection of websites, blogs, online forums promoting masculinity, misogyny, opposition to feminism. Communities within the Manosphere include, literally the first one, men's rights activists, MRAs, also incels, men going their own way, which I'm talking about, pickup artists, and fathers' rights groups. Like, you may say to yourself, well, I'm not part of the Manosphere, I'm not part of the Red Pill community, I'm like MRA, like, that's part of the Manosphere, whether you like it or not. And you're all, while the specifics of each group's beliefs sometimes conflict, they do, they are generally united in the belief that society is biased against men due to the influence of feminism, and that feminism promotes misandry, hatred of men. That is literally your position. And yes, all of these groups, incels, MGTOW, MRA, and, you know, all these new weirdos online from all the podcasts, Fresh and Fit, Myron Gaines, like he's right here, Andrew Tate, like, you're all part of the same broader movement, which is we're men and we think we're being oppressed and we hate and blame women and feminism for it. Like, this is part of your group. You can't distance yourself from it. And I think that's really important to acknowledge this, because throughout his video, he's just associating me with all the worst elements of feminism that I don't agree with. If you don't agree with incels, by your own standards, you should still acknowledge that they're part of your group. This is something I also told, where am I? City Crusher.
We are men's rights activists. We are pro-male activists, okay? But yeah, this dumbass...
Yeah, and you're still in the Manosphere.
Obviously.
And this is the thing also, is that a lot of the arguments he's making are going to be from the perspective of his own MRA lens. My video was addressing MGTOW specifically, so sometimes there's a lot of disconnect between what I'm actually saying, the points I'm actually making, and the things that he's trying to make them about. Anyway.
He didn't do any research on us, right? Because he doesn't do any research, actually. He just says, oh, I have the data. Yeah, we'll see how valid this data actually is, and whether or not you can actually read data and represent data correctly, right? But yeah, let's watch this nonsense here, and I'll rip it to shreds.
The male homeless. In this video, Spetsnaz talks about the struggle of homeless men and how being homeless is a vicious cycle that is very hard to escape. If anything, that video is pretty good at humanizing homeless people and explaining just how...
Homeless men. Okay? The vast majority of homeless people are men.
This is something that both him and City Crusher do, and it's really annoying because, like, I understand that we're trying to approach this topic, but specifically from the male perspective, like how homeless men are dealing with the system. And it's true that there are some differences between how men experience homelessness and how women experience it. But most of the problems that you can describe for men, pretty much all of them, are problems that women are also going to endure if they're on the street. My argument is that women are actually going to deal with other problems in addition to all the problems that they and men also share. But this is where we're also getting into like more of a broader leftist critique, because all I'm really doing in that video is trying to explain the disparity. Why are there more homeless men than homeless women? My argument is that women are statistically, like if you put a man in the streets and a woman in the streets, statistically speaking, they have the same starting point in that situation, the woman is going to end up worse. The reason she's going to end up worse is because, among many other things, while she's also at risk of freezing to death, she's additionally at risk of being sexually assaulted many more times than the man. If a woman is pregnant while she's homeless, that adds a ton of potential health issues, health hazards, that a man in that situation would not have to deal with. If the woman has a child, which is more often than not the case, the vast majority, I go into the stats, 90% of homeless people with children are women. If you have a child with you on the street, that's an extra burden, that's an extra risk, that's an extra person that is even less capable. So if you're a man alone on the streets and you only have to look out for yourself, you are better off than a homeless woman on the streets that also has to look out for a child. That's just fact, you know? But the reason I say this is like a main leftist critique specifically is because in the video, what I'm really just trying to do in that context is just trying to explain that disparity, the way I explained it right now. But that doesn't imply that I am in favor of the system as it is. If you ask me, should there be enough homeless beds for both men and women so that no one is ever homeless? Like, yeah, no shit. Of course I would endorse that. Of course I would be in favor of that. But I would take it even further. As a leftist, I don't think homeless people should exist at all. Rather, I don't think homelessness should exist. That means you tax the crap out of the rich so that we have strong social safety nets, so that we have affordable housing, that we have universal housing even, so that no matter who you are, no matter what situation you're in, you never have to sleep in the street. That would be for both men and women. That's my position on homelessness, my real position. The analysis I bring up here, the reason I say, like, I don't understand why they're talking specifically about men and, just trying to make it about men and women, is because no matter what solution they have, if they have any, to solve the problem of homeless men, there's no reason that it's not a situation that can't also be applied to women. That's why I make it about homeless people, and they insist on making it about homeless men, because for them, it's largely performative. They just want to complain about men's issues. And even if there's a disparity here, which I'm more than willing to acknowledge, my criticisms, my analysis, and my solutions go a lot further than these guys ever let on. Why do these people want men to be the ones to suffer the most? That's because otherwise they don't have a point. Because otherwise they don't have an argument. Like, I've had some people in the comments of that video talking about, like, what's your data to suggest that a woman inside a shelter is worse off than a man in the street? That's not my argument. My argument is that if they are both in the street, the woman is worse off. Statistically, in terms of probabilities, she is worse off. That's just a fact. That's the reason that if you're in a situation where there's not that much resources, that this is the problem with helping homeless people in society today. Like, there's just not that many resources to solve the problem. It's largely incomplete, it's largely insufficient, and that's why you have people who cannot escape homelessness in the first place. But if you have a bit of resources, and you can only help one of two people, and one of them is statistically more likely to suffer in the street, it makes sense that if that's all the resources you have, you're going to try and help the person that needs it the most, statistically speaking. You can say that's misandrist. I would say it's making the best of a bad situation, literally. And, this is where we're also going to fundamentally disagree, because this is where City Crusher says, well, at least women who are in the street can prostitute themselves unlike men, which is already really stupid, because homeless men can prostitute themselves. It's just that they're likely going to be prostituting themselves to other men, which isn't great either, you know? Like, technically, they can both sell their bodies, you know? But that's not really an argument I would use to suggest that they have it easier because you're getting raped. At least that's how I see it, you know? Like, I think the coercive elements in the situation are so disproportional. There's so much coercive factors that I don't think someone on the street starving, selling their bodies is in a position to consent to selling their bodies, realistically. I think there's just too many coercive elements at play. Bad the situation is. It's a big problem in society today that we tend to dehumanize homeless people as outcasts.
Homeless men.
The only way we can really... Again, what am I saying here that isn't both applicable to men and applicable to women? Every time you try and make it about homeless men, it's like you're trying to make the argument that it's not happening to homeless women. I think I'm saying hopeless instead of homeless. You know what I mean, forgive me. They're both going through it. Even if there's a disparity, the experience is the same, more or less. So when I'm starting to list here all the problems that happen with homelessness, and people then tell me, why are you ignoring all the problems that men are going through? It's because they're not listening to anything I'm saying. They think that because I'm saying homeless people, I'm not talking about men. I am. When I say homeless people, it includes men too. It's just that my language is too inclusive for their liking.
By the way, he will actually dehumanize homeless men because he's going to, in a non sequitur manner, bring up homeless women and how they are having it actually worse, even though they are the minority of homeless people. And as we shall see, they also have better access to shelters and all kinds of things, right?
Yes. Enjoy your lives and comforts, knowing that some people live in the street and barely survive at all, is by...
Most rough sleepers are also men, by the way.
Convincing ourselves that their situation is solely the result of poor decision-making. This is a logic that allows us...
No, it was the evil patriarchy, remember? Everything is patriarchy.
Okay, no, again, like, you're so confrontational that, like, my points are actually flying over his head. What I'm talking about right now is the cultural attitudes towards homeless people. The reason homeless people end up getting stuck in the street, whether they are men or women, is because a lot of people justify them being there by saying they deserve it, by saying that they do poor decisions. I'm not even talking about the patriarchy right now. This is a leftist critique. There's a lot of things that go at play in homelessness, but primary among them is wealth inequality. You can't talk about wealth inequality because you're trying to make it about men specifically, so you're trying to make it about misandry, you're trying to make it about feminism. That's not what I'm making it out to be. I'm talking specifically here about wealth inequality and how it's leading to homelessness and how in our culture we are dehumanizing homeless people, both men and women, and putting the blame on them so we don't have to feel bad about the fact that they're out there freezing and starving in the streets while we get to be home and then enjoy our luxuries. There's nothing wrong or incorrect about what I'm saying. He's just being contrarian because he thinks I'm a man-hater. To ignore the very real fact that our system is rigged in a way that will screw people over and...
Oh yeah, and what kind of system do we live in?
Capitalism. Liberalism. I even say it in the video.
Oh yeah, a system that is very feminist actually. But we'll get to that.
Keep them at the bottom to keep others at the top. And by ignoring that, we don't have to change anything about society or ourselves. But as Spetsnaz points out, the very state of homelessness, regardless of how one achieves it, can make a problem significantly worse than it already was. Between the strain on mental health that comes with the uncertainty of homelessness, the unreliable source of shelter and food, the violence, the drugs, the countless arrests and abuse...
Yeah, not having access to shelters. I wonder what this has to do with, I don't know, domestic violence against men and the lack of male domestic violence shelters and, what could the result... What could be the reason behind that? Could it be feminism maybe? And like how feminists have for years campaigned against the idea that men and women have roughly similar domestic violence victimization rates?
Okay, again, this is where I'm talking about... I'm talking about wealth inequality here. Like, all the problems that happen with homelessness, the way that homelessness is being managed is very poorly done. There's a lot of flaws, there's a lot of bias, there's a lot of issues. Like, even if I concede to you that that's a problem, the problem in the first place is that homeless people exist. That's where my real criticism goes. When I make prescriptions for how to solve homelessness, I'm not making prescriptions for women. And I'm not saying men should stay in the street. You are implying that, because every time you make your arguments about homelessness, you try and make it about men and you leave women out of it completely. Everything I listed there, like all the issues, the risks that homeless people go through, homeless men, those are all things that women go through, and then some. That's the argument I make, and, he can't comprehend this.
Could it have something to do with that, maybe? I don't know. What do I know?
Also, in terms of, homeless shelters, I would really have to go back into it. Like, the main time that I will admit here that my knowledge is not, super up to date. I'm sure this guy is just scrubbing the internet constantly for everything that helps his argument. But when it comes to homeless shelters, most of them accept both. At least in America, there are very few men-only shelters, but there are a lot of men and women shelters. And generally, what's supposed to happen, at least, is that if a man go into a shelter and they can't accept him, usually they try and put him in a hotel for the night. This is something I heard from Knowing Better, but he's also a lefty, he's also a progressive, and that's from his video talking about the red pill from years ago. That's just something I remember off the top of my head, but he goes into it and he goes into the data, and that's what he explains. So, I'm just, what feminists are at fault for homeless men? This is what I'm trying to talk about. Like, there are no feminists throwing men out onto the streets. I once picked the house right out of a man's pocket, sold it for gasoline though. I have no idea if it's a joke or what you're saying. I don't understand. I'm too tired. An individual's mental health can deteriorate very quickly when they're homeless. The risk to physical health, from dehydration to malnutrition, can make everything worse. So I do think raising awareness of homelessness from this angle is crucial. But in the case of Spetsnaz's video, I just find myself asking, why is the focus solely on men here?
Yeah, because they're the vast majority of homeless people. Okay? And also because they face unique...
Okay, well, I just went over all of this. The unique problem that men are facing is that they are being less prioritized in a system that can't help everybody. It's kind of like triage, medical triage, trying to figure out who needs healthcare the most, and then starting from there, and those who can afford to wait a little longer, like they're put away. It's kind of the same principle, with the difference being that there's just no resources to take care of everybody at all times. So then they go on statistics, they decide, okay, well, who is more likely to suffer in the streets? This man or this woman? Well, based on the stats we have, if we can only help one person, we might want to help the person that's the least likely to face danger. That doesn't mean the man isn't likely to face hardships because, of course, he's homeless, Exactly, Gottlieb. They say that men are the most homeless people, but then they say they deserve it for poor decision making. This is what I would like to get into here. This is what I would like to hear from A Shield for Men, this guy. What do you think causes homelessness? And do you have any political prescriptions, any ideas for how to solve homelessness? And if you do these only apply to men, or do they apply to everyone equally?
Victims in this and that context. Then they solely focus on women or mention men as a footnote, maybe.
Now, yes, men make up the bulk of homeless people.
Oh, there you go. There's your explanation.
Okay, but they do that a lot. Like City Crusher did the same thing. It's not just about looking at the data. It's about trying to understand the data, properly. Also, I apologize, guys, if you hear my stomach rumbling. I'm doing a bit of fasting right now. Seriously, I started fasting this week. I'm just going to give a quick example here of what I'm talking about. You can't just look at a stat that says 70% are men, 30% are women. Men seem overrepresented in homelessness. That is true. Now, why is that? There is a way to interpret this data. There's a correct way to interpret it, and then there's an incorrect way to interpret it. His interpretation is, well, society hates men, so they're just giving priority to women, and men are left to the curb to suffer and die. My interpretation is, resources are limited. They're trying to assess who is at more risk of suffering if they're homeless, and then they help whoever they can based on who needs it the most. Because women are statistically more likely to suffer from very unique issues, things that men are not necessarily as likely to suffer from, That's why there's a lot more services that go into preventing women from falling homeless in the first place. Ideally, you would just want no homelessness. Or if there is going to be homelessness, you just want it to be there to be enough resources so that both are taken care of. But that's what I mean. Just because you see that stat doesn't mean that we just hate men and we're throwing them to the street. That's a poor data analysis. And another example, like one of the best examples of like poor data comprehension that I've seen in the past decade is the 1350 argument. You guys know that argument? Let me see if I can. 1350 statistic. And even Google says it. The 1350 statistic is a widely circulated but often misleading and decontextualized claim used to suggest a link between race and crime rates. It falsely claims that African Americans, who make up approximately 13% of the population, commit over 50% of all violent crimes and homicide. Now, they say that the stat here isn't strictly correct, that it's misleading, but again, the reason it's so misunderstood is because people then go like, okay, well, if black people make 13% of the population but commit half of all violent crimes, doesn't that mean that black people are like really, really violent? It's like, no, there's other things you need to bring into the context. You know what black people also suffer from predominantly? Poverty. And poverty in black communities is something that you can easily trace back decades, centuries, to see where it's coming from. And what you'll also see, and this is true in every circumstances, one of the biggest factors that lead to crime is poverty. Poor people are more likely to break the law to make ends meet. So if black people are predominantly poor in the United States, then that also means they're more likely to commit crimes. That's not because they're inherently violent. It's because they have a unique economic systemic failure that they're dealing with. This is where systemic racism comes into play. But anyway, I just want to make sure that like this is really clear, because like this is purposefully oversimplifying the data to make his point. But that doesn't mean that homelessness is predominantly a male problem.
Oh, yes, it is, actually, if we define it as who makes up the majority of homeless people.
And again, that's oversimplified.
Then by that definition, it is equal to sexual assault, but we'll get to that.
Nor is it an indicator of systemic discrimination against men.
Oh, yes, it is, actually.
No, it's not.
Homeless community.
Okay, you see?
From
Okay, well, I do like actually that he cites Invisible People, because they are a website that really talk about, they have a YouTube channel and they really humanize homeless people by like talking to them and getting to know them. Very good channel. Everyone should look at them. He's talking here about like how they're overrepresented and underserved. Again, that's because of all the problems I just cited. It is a fact that men make up the bulk of homeless people, but that's not the full story.
Invisible people, men are overrepresented and underserved within why men are the majority of homeless people. Homeless men are far less likely to qualify for emergency shelter when compared to their female counterparts. Single fathers with children bear the burden of finding a shelter that accepts single men and their offspring. Finding a suitable shelter is so rare that many are forced to remain on the street, in hotels, vehicles, or cycling in and out from some combination of the above. Disparities also exist for male victims of domestic violence, many of whom flee from their violent, intimate partners only to learn that the local community resources are for women alone.
Okay. So a solution would be more housing, more assisted housing, subsidized housing, more investing. The reason they make it for women only is often because they have limited capacity, so they go by who is statistically more likely to be dealing with these issues. It's the same thing. Like, you can talk about like abuse in relationships being unreported, and that's true, but the percentage of women dealing with very violent abuse in relationships is far higher than men dealing with like really violent abuse. Like, there are degrees of abuse, right? You can be like smacked around the head, you can be thrown down the stairs, like whatever it is. The point is, women are far more likely to get injured when they're abused by their men than men are to be injured when they're abused by their woman. That's also something to take into consideration. That doesn't mean that it's okay. That doesn't mean that, as such, men deserve to go on the street or be stuck with their partners. But what I would suggest is that if housing was at least in part decommodified, if there was a lot of affordable housing accessible, what you would find is that a lot of people would be breaking up, because there are a lot of people, both men and women, who stay in abusive relationships precisely because they have nowhere to go. Women might have slightly more options in that case, and I agree that that sucks for men, but ideally you just want both of them to have the same resources. This is not something I'm denying, but I am offering constructive solutions that this guy is not offering, because he's not focused on making the world better. He's just trying to focus on how men are suffering more, because that's his whole existence.
This is clearly an indication that men are discriminated against in society. And this lack of male domestic violence shelters, women, and feminist women in particular, have something to do with that, actually. So here's the case of Erin Pisey. She opened up the first male domestic violence shelter, and guess what happened? Militant feminists have threatened her and wanted to basically shut her down, and that she had to flee the country, basically. Right? This is just one example. I have other videos where I show that feminists lie about domestic violence, and they have even falsified research and all of that nonsense. Okay,
I'm sure this happens, and I agree that sucks. If it actually happens, and that's something that really happened, and there are feminists out there who say that's bad, or they're fighting against it because they're just being bitter or whatever, yeah, I agree. It's dumb, it's cringe, and they shouldn't do that. The problem, again, is that they are desperate to line up all of the feminists together to make the same hate group by only defining the worst elements of whoever called themselves feminism. But I just explained it earlier. Like, if there were feminists 100 years ago that were eugenics, I wouldn't associate with them. If there's a woman just doing a homeless shelter for men, and then for whatever reason a group of feminists decide that they need to attack that shelter because how dare they give men any help, yeah, that's bad. But I don't feel like I have to defend this, because I don't associate with it. In fact, a shield for men, like we just established earlier. You are a men's rights activist, that means you are part of the Manosphere. There's no way around it. You can say that you're not, you are. The men's rights activists, the incels, they're part of the same broader movement of the Manosphere. That's just how it is. So, cry about it. If every time you started talking, started bringing up points, I started saying, you guys radicalized Elliot Rodger into killing all these people. You guys radicalized all these incels into doing all these shootings and all these other attacks and murders. You'll probably look at me and be like, I assume, you'll probably be like, okay, I don't, support any of that. I think that's bad. I think incels are cringe. I'm not an incel myself. I don't think people should be incels. And I'd be like, great, that's fantastic. I'm glad we agree on that. So can you stop all these association fallacies that you're trying to make constantly? Like, I get you don't like feminists. I get you think they're all a hate movement. But there are genuine policies driven by different schools of feminism, by different activist groups of feminists that don't support any of this stuff. The mere fact that I consider myself a feminist, that I don't side with you in the Manosphere or most of the things that you guys believe, but I can still, believe in women's equality, I can still believe in the patriarchy, and I can still see something like this and think that's wrong. You need to be able to reconcile my positions with the things that you think about feminists. And you need to concede that, it's not all feminists, just like it's not all Manosphere types. That's just something that we have to agree on, because otherwise, every single time you're going to make an association like that, I'm just going to associate you with Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate trafficked women. That means you are in favor of trafficking women. You are in favor of women being subservient to men. Because some men in the Manosphere actually think that. Deal with it. That's part of your movement. Deal with it. So with that, I'm going to skip
evidence. Lack of access to housing
Yeah, we already went over all of that.
So yeah, all those things are in the people.
Why the disparity between homeless men and women is so large? You'll realize that even though men are more likely to experience homelessness, they don't have it the worst.
By what metric? So let's look at mortality rates. National Homeless Mortality Overview. Men account for approximately 3 in 4 of homeless decedents.
So if men make up 3/4 of homeless people, and then they make up 3/4 of homeless deaths, that means they're just accurately represented in the fatalities of homelessness. That seems perfectly consistent. At the same time, this is the other thing that we have to focus on, because every time they bring up violence done by men, who does the violence against men? You know, what is the likelihood that men are just murdered and assaulted by women as opposed to just other men?
That means they're the most homeless, use disorder, trauma.
Okay, again, like, this is just a list of the deaths. But here he's talking about, like, you know, like the percentage of deaths were due to natural causes. Is that exclusively for the 75% of men or something? Interesting mortality statistic, probably fake. I need to see Chicago for the real one. Exactly, like, there's that too. Like, I have no idea what that study says. He's just going through it. I'm sure it's linked down below. That's fine, but you think I'm just going to go through all of that? No, thank you. What I'm just saying is, all of these deaths, that's for all homeless people. That means that some women died in here as well. Like, don't make it out to be like all of these deaths are like exclusively for men. Like, it's also for women too. Even if women make like a smaller disparity, the point is, like I said, it's just women personally suffer more in general, but more men suffer than women. Quantity of people who suffer are not equal to the suffrage of one person. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, like, people can deal with lots of different issues. Like, it's all relative, I suppose. But this is what I mean. Like, if you're gonna complain that 3/4 of men make up the deaths, they're not overrepresented, because technically they're also 3/4 of homeless people. That just means that men and women, at least to some extent, have the same mortality rates than... They have the same mortality rates when it comes to homelessness. But if you look at the stats on sexual violence, if you look at the stats on, you know, like, any health complications due to a female's anatomy that a man doesn't have to deal with, then in those instances you will see that women often suffer more than men. You know,
Men are the say
experienced by homeless women, and then...
yes, but less, and they have better access to shelters. And they're also more likely to have family support and social support. And I've shown in past videos, and City Crusher has...
So let's give all of them support. Like, that's still like my main argument here. Like, if you want to complain that men... we've been through it so many times. I'm saying make it better for everybody. You know, we can disagree on how we interpret the data. You think I'm wrong, I think you're wrong. You know, I don't really care on debating the minutiae of all of it, because my real concern is I just don't want people to be homeless, period.
Also show
Likely to experience violence in the streets, such as sexual assault. And some. For example, homeless women are far more likely to experience violence in the streets, such as sexual assault.
yeah, maybe. The problem with that is men tend to underreport, and
Okay, so if they underreport, is the implication there that they experience it at the exact same rate? Because there's lots of data on that. There is a lot of data on that. And women underreport too. Let's be clear. Women underreport their sexual assaults as well. And then there's, as we talk about later in the false allegations, even proving that an assault happened is a lot more complicated too.
are less recognized when they experience such sexual assault. So
Yeah, that's also a problem, that men not being taken seriously when they're assaulted is also a result of expecting men to be stronger than that. If you're a woman who got assaulted, generally, if people aren't like outright trying to blame it on you because of how you were dressing, they will generally sympathize with the woman, saying she was a victim, saying she was vulnerable, saying that she was overpowered, whatever. If a man says he was assaulted, especially by a woman, lots of men will think they're pussies. Lots of men will think they're weak. And that's one of the things that will discourage a lot of men from reporting their own assaults. And all of that comes back to toxic masculinity, which comes back to the patriarchy. Look at how we went full circle. I at least have like a full explanation from where it starts and where it leads, or where it ended and where it comes from. He doesn't. He can't. His only explanation is like stupidly narrow-minded. It's just like, well, society hates men and women are in power and that's it. And it's like, the data just never supports it.
Oh, I don't really trust that data, actually.
They're also far more likely to have a child with them. The data very... Okay, you say you don't trust it, but that's your purview. What if I just don't trust you? Is that sufficient evidence for me to disregard this entire video?
They might be far more likely to have a child with them, but why does this constitute evidence of them having it worse in general?
You want to think about that for more than a few seconds? I mean, I already explained it because, like, in my mind, I already kind of knew where you were going. I remember some of your arguments, so I already explained it, but which is harder? Seriously, which is harder, Shield for Men? Being homeless by yourself? Being homeless and having someone to take care of that's incapable of taking care of themselves? Which is going to have an easier situation? They're both in the shit, don't get me wrong. They're both struggling. Could you argue that someone who has someone to look out to, someone else to feed, someone else to clothe and shelter and protect, is just going to have a harder time? Please. Country to country, of course. Being Canadian myself, I'm looking at data from Canada, but you will find similar patterns in other countries. So, reading from the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights, 90% of families using emergency shelters are headed by single women.
Yes, and men don't have access to those shelters.
Now, I agree, but just look back to what I just said. It's like you're complaining here that homeless shelters are prioritizing children over men. Like, you can say what you want about male disposability when it comes to sacrificing themselves for women. That's a whole other topic. But I think we can agree that in a situation where you have a man, you have a woman, and you have a child, and you can only save one of them, you might just save the child. Not because you hate men, not because you hate women, but because the child is, we tend to just think of children as like, they're more precious, they're more important, they're the next generation, they have a life to live, they still have a life to live. And we're not in the business of just letting children suffer. A mother would sacrifice herself for a kid, just like a father would sacrifice himself for their kid. So it kind of just makes sense. I'm falling into common sense rhetoric here, which speaks a lot to this guy's arguments.
No, women have it worse, right?
Further down it reads, the same survey shows that 37% of young women and 41% of trans and non-binary people who are homeless will experience sexual assault, compared to just 8% of men.
Again, I don't trust this data because this is probably feminist research, that's number one. Number two, men tend to underreport. Okay,
so by that metric, we can now ignore every single source you have. If all it takes for me to disregard any of your sources is to just not trust them, because I don't need more than that, then that's it. Like, you want to have like an honest intellectual conversation, you need to be able to address all of these things in good faith. This is what I'm talking. Yeah, trust issues. This is embarrassing. Why should I trust anything you have to say now if you're not going to give me or my sources the same benefit of the doubt without checking them? For the record, like, I appreciate that you put all your sources in the description. So are mine. Mine are in the description as well. If you want to take them one by one and deconstruct them, like, knock yourself out. But if you're just going to be like, nah, I don't trust them. Okay, don't trust them. There's nothing else to argue. This is the level of intellectual integrity that we're working on now. So on average, 9 out of 10 homeless people with children are women, and at least 1 homeless woman out of 3 will be sexually assaulted.
Again, the sexual assault rate's questionable. I don't see how...
Listen, I am more than willing to concede on your point that men underrepresent. This is the difference between you and me. I can concede on some things. I can agree with you that a lot of men will probably not report their own assaults. Totally fair. But you have to apply the same benefit to women. Women have been encouraged a lot more because they're typically more victims than offenders. But that's what I'm talking about. Like,
women having access to their children is an indicator that they have it worse, per se, and men face barriers to access to shelters. They have higher mortality rates, worse health outcomes.
The mortality rate is perfectly in line with the amount of people that are on the street. If 3/4 of men are homeless and they make up 3/4 of fatalities, that means the 1/4 that are women also is 1/4 of women who makes up the casualties. That means they more or less have the same fatality rate when they're in the streets. That doesn't mean that women still don't experience additional issues and challenges on top of what they both experience together.
More likely to die, more likely to commit suicide, and so on and so forth. So how do women have it worse? And again, homeless women are just 20 to 30% of the entire homeless population compared to 70 to 80% of men.
Compared to 1 homeless man out of 10. This also means that homeless women are less likely to seek a homeless shelter if those accept men also.
Again, the vast majority of people in those shelters are women. Okay? And look how they...
Okay, again, this is like another fallacy. Because a lot of women are receiving, on average, more access to homeless shelters and homeless services, this is why men are overrepresented on the street. But that doesn't mean that let's put it this way. To suggest that men are overrepresented, like as homeless people dealing with homelessness, what we would actually need to see is basically all shelters giving equal access to men and women. You know, we take a man, we take a woman, completely irrespective of what they're dealing with, completely irrespective of everything that's happening, and then you look back at the census, what's the percentage of men on the street, what's the percentage of women on the street? Because what I think would happen, I could be wrong, but what I think would happen is if you give equal access to men and women in homeless shelters, you will probably find that the proportions of men and women on the street is going to be a lot similar to each other. And what I'm trying to say with that is that there's actually an equal amount, both of men and women, for possibly different reasons, that are all at risk of homelessness. For his understanding to work properly, it can't just be that women get priority in homeless shelters. It has to be that even if you give all of that to men, like there's just more men, naturally, there's just more men who are homeless than women. Does that make sense? This is what I mean, like, it's because like we're kind of working around the data, we're speculating a lot, he's speculating a lot, and I hope this makes sense anyway.
Try to inflate the numbers here. I haven't even looked at this source in particular, but I can just smell the bullshit. 68% of shelter beds were co-ed or dedicated to men compared to 13% dedicated to women.
Okay, well there you go, you can just smell it, so let's move on.
Of those 60, that's for
pregnancy, and you start to understand.
Again, men have worse health than women.
These stats are for everyone dying from homelessness, not just men. It says like many homeless death reports include a breakdown of the causes of death. In Denver, 30% of deaths were due to natural causes and 40. There's nothing here that says that this is specifically about men. You can say it because men are overrepresented, they make up the bulk of these deaths. But it's not because they're naturally dealing with more deaths. It just means that they're overrepresented. Women die at the same rate in these instances. You're just not understanding the data here. Your own data. Embarrassing. And why in a system where aid for the homeless is always limited, that what little there is tends to prioritize homeless people that are statistically more vulnerable. And on average, homeless women are more vulnerable than homeless men.
That is not proven. You have not proven that. Men are more...
Again, I told you that part that they all deal with the same issues, and then women have an increased risk of health complications with pregnancy and sexual assault. So that's something that gets added on top. You say I don't improve it because you just don't trust my data. So again, like the I don't believe you ultimate weapon, you know? It just lets you dismiss everything. You don't have to look into it. You don't have to. You can just say, well, it sounds feminist to me, therefore I'm not going to listen to it. He's having the same problem as City Crusher. We talked about discussing, but this is something that he needs to acknowledge. If that's the angle that he's approaching it from, the moment I don't like it, I can just dismiss it. There's no point in talking to you because you're just going to bullshit your way out of everything every time it doesn't work in your favor.
Vulnerable male.
For example, on average from the criminal justice system, which in turn...
Yes, it should.
I think we've gone through this quite a lot. Well, I think he's going to male disposability soon.
Me? Okay. Homeless men are more likely to be unsheltered and
okay, we've already gone through this. Or proportionally allocated to women. By focusing solely on men, though.
Expected in a system.
Do so by a
higher. Yeah, it is wealth inequality. I don't disagree with that.
Oh, he's actually talking about the causes of homelessness.
Fuck you.
Descriptive solution offered being that society needs to focus more on men and boys. He can't even address the root of the homeless problem, which, to be clear, is not that we don't care about men and we're sending them to the street. The real problem is...
Oh yes, that is. This is exactly the problem.
It's wealth inequality. The increased cost...
Yeah, it is wealth inequality. I don't disagree with that. But it is also feminism. So destroyed you on that point. Next aspect of this video. On the...
Okay, so you agree it's wealth inequality. What you need to understand, and I'm just going to reiterate this point one last time. If you solve wealth inequality, you're going to end homelessness for everybody. If you want to blame feminism and keep blaming feminism, I mean, you do you, man. I know that you are completely red pill brained on this issue. Fine, whatever. If you tax the rich, if you reinvest in social safety nets, if you make housing affordable, you can end homelessness for everybody, men and women. Are we on board with this? Can we agree on this? Because if we agree on this, then for me, there's nothing else to talk about. I don't care to debate with you the minutiae of how it happens, because clearly we'll never agree with each other, because if I bring a source that contradicts you, you're just going to say you don't trust it, and then that's it. There's nowhere to go here. But if we can agree that we can reinvest in society with left-wing policies of, universal healthcare, universal education, affordable housing, better transportation, better access to mental health care, like... I'm not talking with you about whether those things are feasible, because I know people will debate about those things too, but to me, that's what really matters. Let's solve homelessness, period. I am a feminist, but I don't want men to be homeless in the streets. I don't hate men that I want them on the streets. I just want people to not be homeless. Can we agree on that? Is that fair? Anyway, let's get to this.
Disposable male part here. He says that these wars, the Korean War, Vietnam War, Persian Gulf War, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, you can see that the vast majority of victims, U.S. military victims, are male. When you actually look into these kinds of things, the vast majority of civilian deaths are also male when it comes to war. Okay, and he's saying stuff like this.
But looking back at all of those wars, were women even allowed to join the military?
Yes, in those wars, women were allowed to join the military. Women could serve as permanent regular members of the U.S. military after the Women Armed Services Integration Act of 1948 was signed into law.
Okay, I'm specifically talking about combat roles, though. If you have people dying in wars, it's because they're in combat. They're on the front line. Women were allowed for quite a while to join in many different capacities. If you're a nurse in the field hospital, you're not typically close to the front line, you know what I mean? So if this was allowed, if they were able to join in logistical capacities and stuff like that, yeah, that's great too. But when we're talking about casualties, we're typically talking of people on the front line fighting and putting their lives on the line and often losing them. If women were able to join in 1948, for example, the Army hired women nurses under contract during the Spanish-American War. See, They were army nurses. They're not in combat roles. So that does not disprove my point at all. What I'm talking about specifically is women in combat roles and also enlisting voluntarily. This is the other thing I talked about with City Crusher.
By President Harry S. Truman. Okay? So, but he wants to say, oh, patriarchy though. Right, that's the explanation for everything.
Yes, and you still don't have an actual counter for that. You just say, your only counter to that was citing your own post.
It couldn't just be that men try to protect women from the horrors of war and just want to sacrifice other men.
This is before 1948? Wait. Shoot.
Just the were more like within sacrifice other men. Men be as Truman.
Oh, before 1948. Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, so I guess the question is, like, hey, maybe I'm completely wrong. Let's look into it. Women could officially join combat roles in the US military starting in March 2016, when the Pentagon opened all combat jobs to them. This followed the 2013 decision to lift the ban on women serving in ground combat units below the brigade level and was fully implemented in 2016. This is actually, I think, like one of the screenshots I took from my video. They could officially join in combat role. Maybe there was exceptions before that. Maybe there was like things they could do. But over 200 years of service, the history of women in the military. Like, at least legally speaking, like every single role that is open to men was not open to women in the US military until 9 years ago. So I'm sure there were women in combat roles before that. You can find some exceptions. Maybe the law wasn't always clear and it allowed for women to join. But my point still stands here.
Okay.
Okay? And all of these wars were before 2016, just so we're clear.
So, but he wants to say, oh, patriarchy though. Right, that's the explanation for everything.
Well, again, what do you say about like the historical cultural norms of the cultural belief that men need to be the ones going in wars and women need to stay at home and take care of the kids? Because this is what defines this. This is what defines the draft. This is exactly
it. Couldn't just be that men try to protect women from the horrors of war and just want to sacrifice other men. And
yes, thank you. And where do they get that notion from? How did that happen? Is this biological? No, it's not. You are making the point for me, dude. Wake up.
Women are actually okay with that, largely speaking. I mean, I've done a video
showing... Yes, because they're also part of the same thing, you know? Like, women are taught that they're also supposed to stay home, and they will often see being expected to fill roles traditionally run by men with resistance, because they're like, that's not what I was brought up to do. That's how it's affecting women as well, anyway.
Some female academic, I think a military historian, and she basically tried to justify the male-only draft in Germany that is currently a thing in Germany.
Okay, and I'll say the same thing I've just said about the draft like multiple times. If your problem with the draft is that it only drafts men, end it. I'm all for ending the draft. So as far as I'm concerned, that's all there is to it.
I should also do a video on history where also men were conscripted, right? And women or queens.
Also, excuse me, liberal. Have you considered that sometimes women ruled kingdoms? Checkmate, liberal. That's what this is. It's like, oh, have you considered that like when queens were in power, they also used men? Yeah, the same way kings used the men power for their conquering ambitions. That's what kings and queens do. Like, I don't have anything to add to that. Like, Jesus.
Queens were and male, and we can it in the Ukraine. 1950 to 1953, over 100,000 women served in the Korean War, taking on roles such as military, police, and engineering.
Okay, military, police, and engineering. Where's infantry, boots on the ground, front lines in there?
Rear opportunity, Finland was 1,000 times. Civilian deaths from explosive weapons in Syria. Vast majority of victims are male.
Yes.
combat roles in the Iraq War. Okay.
Yes, they serve. That's
Women
great.
serve intelligent gatherers.
The reason then, this is the other reason you have to bring, okay? So the first issue is the draft was only for men. So if you're only drafting men, it's logical that you're going to see the vast majority of casualties being men. The other one is, even in the context of enlisting, this is something I also bring up in the video, and it's the workplace culture. There are a lot of jobs that are traditionally associated with men, and there are a lot of jobs that are traditionally associated with women. So you can think of any jobs that are like very like manual, working on an oil rig, working in construction, working in mining, being a soldier in the military, being a fireman, being a policeman. Those are all jobs that have traditionally been masculine, and there's very little incentive, even today in society, to encourage women into entering those practices. Women are encouraged to be nurses, they're encouraged to be teachers, they're encouraged to be homemakers. So because there's a lot of incentive like that are leaning people towards certain career paths, that means that even though women can be allowed to enlist in the military, there's still a culture in place that is still discouraging it. And that's just true. That is demonstrably true. You can look at the data. That is true. So what that means is that even if, since, like I said, like we just looked, it's only been 9 years since women have been allowed in the US military in all combat roles. You can't expect the military to ever be 50-50 men-woman. For the longest time, it's probably always going to be a vast majority of men, because women are discouraged from joining the military. Like the women who join the military, they're the people you would typically associate with being like tomboys. Women who are very like physical, who are very tall, very strong, like those are women who are going to be joining the military or are going to aspire to join the military, and those women, more often than not, have to deal with the misogyny of the men they fight alongside with. So again, like this is not complicated at all. This is why even if you take out the draft, you are still going to see that most casualties are men. But that's not because men are oppressed and being sent to war to die. It's because culturally it is still seen as a male job. And you can look at the opposite too. There are men. There's an increasing number of men becoming nurses, and that's still frowned upon in a lot of places. Some men, they are going to become nurses and it's going to feel emasculated, or some people are going to perceive it as if it's gay, you know? This also completely ignores civilian deaths. Where he's bringing it up, and I'm kind of skipping through because, again, it doesn't matter.
Gatherers and in security checkpoints where they were exposed to enemy fire. Oh, yes, they were.
They're going to be men. But feminists have been fighting for the right to join the military for decades.
Again, the selective service.
You guys are still conflating the draft, which is compulsory, with enlisting, which is voluntary. Just end the draft and leave it at that. Shut up.
Still shows theory is that, oh, women were banned from direct combat roles, even though they actually allowed a majority of drafts entirely.
Firefighters and police. You can't complain that men die as firefighters if you're not even letting women... So I see it here. A report by the London Fire Brigade found that discouraging factors included the portrayal of firefighting in the media. Yeah, you're really not going to see a lot of representation. It's always like these big masculine men doing the man's work. Like, women are not going to feel represented in those roles, and it's also going to be one of those things that lead them to not like seek those careers necessarily. A lack of information available to young girls and unrealistic ideas about the role. Other issues include shift patterns that are not suitable for mothers with young children. Like, it's all here. Like, there's a lot of things. The culture, even as things become legal, the culture can still retain a lot of the patriarchal structure. This is what you see here. When being a firefighter is a job that is explicitly advertised to young men and boys, and women are not included in that advertising, you're going to end up with more men joining than women. That basic math and join in the first place.
Okay, this is nonsense. So
of course it is. Of course.
Firefighter. Yeah, again, and they were also pretty much involved in the economy as workers right up until the Industrial Revolution, and shortly, more or less.
Oh yeah, there's that argument too.
No. We have even evidence that there were female blacksmiths, and they were also pretty much involved in the economy as workers right up until the Industrial Revolution.
That's very interesting. Then what happened?
And shortly, more or less shortly after that, they left the majority of work to men. This is what actual historical evidence shows.
Yes, I'm sure historically you can look at any time and place where women were holding jobs, were being treated equally, and they just said, you know what, we're done with equality. Let us be homemakers, you take the job. I'm sure that's exactly what happened, and there was nothing else around it.
I've shown this in past videos.
Not legally, then culturally. The few that have managed to get it.
Oh, culturally, right.
Yeah, I was just citing that, so of course he doesn't believe in it.
Harassment. It goes in one direction.
Bringing up the patriarchy in this context is...
A patriarchy
Yes.
is not just the standard nonsense that feminists have put forward, that have that men didn't set up this.
Oh yeah, he cites himself here. You see? A Shield for Men, MRA, Substack. Yeah, he's on there. He's got his own things. Like, that guy is really invested. I'll give him props for that. But, you know, like, I wouldn't just cite myself. If you cite other people in that article, I would suggest you cite those instead. But that comes off like very, you know, what's your source? My source is trust me, bro. Which, you're not trusting me, so why do I trust you?
Quote-unquote patriarchy, but women set up traditional and who have...
At some point he goes into hypergamy as well. I really don't care. That's not part of any of my arguments. He brings up the White Feather campaign again. Oh, I think we get into circumcision. And, hold up.
Was she a man's rights activist? I don't think so. Okay?
Best analysis of the problem, and we can't have that in a Make Now video. Feminism must always be bad in any...
Oh yes, it is actually bad. Let me show you. So, let's read this here. Feminism...
Okay, so again, like, I don't care. I'm sure you have sources. I'm sure there's a lot of feminist groups, but, like, I don't associate with the groups that do anything bad. I'm the one good feminist. I'm the one good feminist who doesn't want anything bad to happen to you, and I just want equality between men and women. I'm the one. I'm the only source I need. I am myself. You need to deal with me. Okay, there's the male disposability here again, like... Oh, circumcision. But I will say, he comes off as a more concrete example of MGTOW men being weird and somewhat unhinged.
Oh yeah, weird and somewhat unhinged. Why is this always... Why are these terms always brought up whenever a man rightfully complains about circumcision?
Okay, so... At this point, I would rather read the comments to see like what we actually argued about. But the main gist of it is that in the video, I literally say unambiguously that I don't think circumcision should be done unless it's a medical necessity. That's my position right there, like unambiguous. When I'm talking about being weird and unhinged and insane and dumb, is specifically Barbarossa's explanation for why men are being circumcised. And we went over it the last time, and this guy is misunderstanding it the same way that City Crusher was. Says the man who calls you smug in the beginning. Yeah, he calls me smug one time, and then it's like... Enjoy the smugness for the rest of the video, man. Holy crap.
I wonder if this has anything to do with bias.
Oh, I wonder if this has anything to do with bias. Maybe it has something to do with your bias, man, because I give you unambiguously my position in this video and you seem completely unable to discuss it. It's like you keep trying to make my argument be the argument that other people I don't know about are making. I literally said in the video, and then I told you, and you still didn't want to listen. You said I was making excuses, lame excuses, that's what you said. I don't believe that circumcision should happen unless it's medically necessary. Now, if you want to argue the medical necessity, I don't care. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of things that could be treated without circumcising. If that's true, then I'm in favor of doing those things instead of doing circumcision, because that's my position. It's self-explanatory. It's as unambiguously clear as it can be. So, there's a lot of debate around circumcision, right? Like, should it be allowed? Should it even...
It shouldn't be allowed.
Even be normalized? I'm just explaining what the topic around circumcision is. Like, I know you're eager to give your answer, but that's not what I'm talking about. And
no, it shouldn't.
Broadly speaking, I tend to side with Bar here. I don't think circumcision should be done unless it's medically necessary.
It's pretty much never medically necessary.
Okay, you want to make that argument, that's fine, but don't say that I didn't say that line. I just told you my position. And I am getting a little passionate right now because I've seen the way he talks about it in the comments, and it's like, it is unbelievable to me, like how this is so hard to grasp.
And even if there were some supposed health benefits, there are no health benefits, but even if there were, there are alternative treatments.
Yeah, and I said it shouldn't be done unless it's necessary. One of the things I brought up in my response to City Crusher is that the main driving reason people get circumcised today as infants, it's because the doctor is strongly recommending it to the parents because they believe, that like there's potential issues that you could get later on if you keep the foreskin, and you may avoid these, and there may be some other benefits by, cutting it off. And I literally say, unless it's necessary. Doing it as a medical prevention, I don't agree with. I think if you're not going to do it, then you should inform yourself on what the risks are, and you should, know what you're getting into. Most people are going to be fine. Like, don't get me wrong. It's just that there are still some unique issues that you're going to have to potentially deal with, even if it's rare. You just have to know about it. You just have to be informed. That's my position. Don't just do it preemptively. Just know what you're getting into, know how to avoid potential issues, and know how to deal with them when they happen. That's it.
So no, it's not medically necessary.
And a good chunk of circumcisions come from religion, like Judaism and Islam.
That is a common excuse that people make that want to take away the gendered aspect of this.
I mean, it's religion. It is religion, right? Whether it's women in religion or men in religion, it's religion. So I'm talking about it specifically from religion. Because if there's a woman who's an atheist, and she's not in favor of circumcision, and the woman who is religious is in favor of circumcision, the reason for the two of them, why they're for and why they're against, the driving factor is religion. So I don't really care.
Right, they just want to blame religion. Meanwhile, there are also a lot of atheists who do this.
Yes, as medical prevention. Whether that's something you disagree with, like I understand it.
Okay, so it's actually more universal. But yeah.
Infants who cannot consent. But those are usually the main reasons for circumcision. I mean, don't I say here?
That bad banana.
Who cannot consent. I don't think those are moral, especially if they are done on children and infants who cannot consent. Okay, take the win. We agree with each other, right? I just said that. We shouldn't do it on children and infants who cannot consent. That's my position. Can you take the win, please? Can you celebrate that we agree on this premise?
Religious circumcision? And what?
Or do you just need to be like so contrarian because I'm a feminist, so I'm your sworn enemy? Like, calm down.
There's also the reason behind atheist circumcision. I think the issue goes a little bit deeper here, right? Because those kinds of things don't come out of nowhere.
Religious tradition, medical necessity, or medical prevention. Barbarossa, however, has a very interesting take.
When we circumcise young boys or infants.
Okay, so this is the take of Barbarossa where he says that the reason predominantly that circumcision is done is because women prefer circumcised penises. Therefore, the parents, they have their newborn baby and they're like, hold on. He's got a foreskin though. What about the woman he has sex with in 20 years? They're going to prefer a circumcised penis. So should we just cut it off as a favor to her? That's what he's saying here.
Assume that boys will consent to doing to them. We are surgically mutilating their genitals, and we are assuming that one day, perhaps 14 or 15 years into the future, they will be appreciative of the fact that their parents did so when the boy starts taking an interest in women sexually. That's why we really do it. It's for female aesthetic preference. So we assume that boys will consent to it because in the future, 15, 20 years down the road, both, I guess,
Okay, so this is what I'm saying. Like, I'm not making this up, right? Circumcision is actually a form of male oppression because
it is actually.
Because it's being primarily done to be aesthetically pleasing to women. Any sources?
Okay, I mean, City Crusher already showed one source for that?
His City Crusher's source was men or boys or children, I guess, being circumcised in the Victorian era 200 years ago as a way to prevent them from masturbating. That was his source, for one. The other source was just keep showing data that says that women prefer circumcised penises, to which I'm going to say the same thing. Just because women prefer circumcised penises doesn't mean that that's the leading factor for why children, babies, are being circumcised. It has nothing to do with one another.
I also have some sources that women definitely are contributing to circumcision, whether or not...
Yes, because they're being told by doctors, if you don't do that, they might get infections, they might get this, they might get that. So they're like, oh no, well, I don't want my kid to have that, so I'm just going to have them circumcised.
It's for aesthetic reasons or for any other reason.
Yes, a mother looks at her infant son, and she's thinking, well, I like circumcised dick better. I'm gonna make sure he makes the woman he fucks happy. That's totally the reasoning here.
But they do seem to prefer it, or a lot of women seem to prefer it. Okay, and they are one of the causes behind it, definitely. So this is from my video response to Bad Empanada, also on circumcision.
Okay, I appreciate it, but I don't trust you, and you're just signing your own video in which you're citing a source like, no thank you.
Circumcision show that through their practice, women were an active part of the chain of rabbinic culture's evolution and development. So women were actually part of the very purpose of it.
So they had a say in religion or something. Okay, who cares?
Was then he's about majority of them are women. Then he also says again.
Okay, so I'm guessing here, like, there's a surprisingly large amount of women who are doctors who do these procedures. Yeah, so if they are female doctors, they see babies and they're like, I'm going to get to slip them. Because I'm an evil woman feminist, and I want to oppress men.
Practice, it's men impose this upon other men. Meanwhile, on Reddit, there were subreddits like Circ Moms, too.
Oh, Reddit. Great source, for sure.
Is celebrating, is type. A lot of interesting information. For example, parents' reasons for choosing male child genital cutting vary greatly.
It varies greatly. So you're telling me there's multiple reasons? That it's not the main reason? I'll take this clip so out of context. I'm sure you will. Godspeed to you.
Some studies have concluded that the dominant deciding factor is the mother's preference or the father's penile status. So the mother's preference, dominant factor.
Hygiene is a commonly stated reason. Some parents believe that circumcision is an eventuality, so they might as well do it in infancy to prevent him from remembering the pain. Health concerns in general are also reasons parents give, even though such claims have been refuted. This is that too. This is the one thing, like, because I had to freshen up a bit on the circumcision this morning while I was arguing with the guy. But, like, yeah, a lot of the things that people talk about in terms of, like, potential issues that baby boys can have as a result of keeping the foreskin, they're actually pretty rare. If you stay hygienic, if you clean everything properly, like, you'll never have most of the problems that are associated. There is one problem that is commonly associated, and that's a problem that you can only have if you're not circumcised, and it's, I already forgot the term. Maybe you know the term, telling me? It's when the foreskin completely sews shut. But even that, apparently, as I was reading into it, even that, it's possible to cure it without just cutting it off. So my friend from 20 years ago, maybe back then, it's the main solution he had when he was circumcised because he had that issue. But it is possible, potentially, with other methods that don't require any cutting, to actually get it to open back up again, which it's fantastic if that's true. Then we should totally do that instead of just circumcising. I agree. If you really want to make an argument about circumcision and why it's bad and why it's so prevalent in society, I think it's because it just has like a really strong cultural element to it. And it's also something that is immensely outdated. This is the main problem with circumcision by itself. It's extremely outdated. I mean, we're talking about, like, I heard of circumcision for the first time. It was the Jewish people doing it in the Ancient Testament, thousands of years ago. This was becoming a thing, at least. And people just associate it with religion, they just associate it with a bunch of things, and it is true that even in medicine, there are often things, notions, that we believe about, our health or sexuality, that then like a couple of years later, a couple of decades later, new data, new research is done, and then we realize that it's completely unnecessary anymore. This is something telling me that you will probably find in while you're studying healthcare or medicine. It's there's a lot of different things. There's a lot. I was watching the other day the Dr. Mike video on Jubilee where he debated a bunch of anti-vaxxers. He brought up an example of a doctor like 30 years older than him who knew a procedure to diagnose their patients with a specific illness that doesn't exist anymore. That means that Dr. Mike, he knows that's a disease that used to exist, but if he had to diagnose it, he's not even equipped for how to do it because when you went to school, it was already considered outdated. I think it's the same thing with circumcision. If we understand that circumcision is outdated and that whatever problems that can arise from keeping the foreskin is either rare or that there's very simple ways of like preventing it, then I think that's where society should head towards. Like, I'm totally in favor of that. But for some reason, like just because I called this one specific example completely stupid, this idea that parents are doing it for the aesthetic preference of their son's future sexual partners, that is completely stupid. That is completely unhinged. I double down on this because it's not substantiated by any data whatsoever. He doesn't have any data. This paper right here doesn't say anything about that.
Only a deciding factor, okay? Okay, yeah, but women have nothing to do with this, right? Women have nothing to do with this. What about this paper? Women's preferences for penile circumcision and sexual partners.
Again, just because that's what they prefer doesn't mean that's the reason they're doing it. Those are different. Those are not the same thing. Okay, right?
Or if one circumcised is not the biggest, but still.
Oh yeah, this is something that we should keep in mind also. Like, he's acknowledging here that while he is using this source, the survey only had 145 new mothers, and he's like, yeah, it's not a large sample, but still.
This is some evidence, at least, and I think...
Oh, this is some evidence, it's not much, but it still counts for something. Speedrunning this now.
Male genital mutilation, aka circumcision. I did a video on this, how feminists enable baby torture.
He made a video on this that's being shared on the subreddit Save Boys from Knife Rape. 212 followers? How niche is this? A guy I know likes my haircut. Clearly, I got the haircut for him specifically, or he forced me to get this one. Great analogy. That's exactly it. It's that stupid. Is that like 12 followers? This is the logic with women like circumcised men, therefore they're responsible for a thing. Yeah, it's what I mean. Like, just because they have a preference for a certain thing doesn't mean that when the infant is born and the doctor is talking with the parents and they have the discussion over circumcision, that this is the one thing that's being brought up. I just don't think so, and I haven't seen any data to support it, and he's not bringing up any either. He's going to say, well, it's at least in part true, but it's just because you want to be right about it. You still don't have any data. You're just speculating still.
Here you have this feminist organization, Alliance for Reproductive Health, that says FGM is not the same as male circumcision.
It is factually not. Like, if you're talking about like the outcome of those, they are very different. That's not disputable. That doesn't mean that I'm in favor of male circumcision. I'm against FGM, but they are very different. That there's no denying about it.
And
also, isn't that just whataboutism? I mean, I'm not in favor of circumcision, so I'm not in favor of circumcision for a man or woman, so I don't really care.
And also psychological issues, infections and complications. I've done psychological issues.
Hold up.
Infections and complications. I've done so many videos on this. It is
serious and fatal complications after neonatal circumcision. One infant was taken to the operating room to remove an obstructing plastibell ring. 7 boys were admitted to the intensive care unit with severe bleeding or sepsis. 3 of them ultimately progressed to hemorrhagic or septic shock. 2 of these children died of complications. We estimate that the annual incidence of severe complications requiring hospitalization was approximately 0.01%. I'm pretty sure there are way more medical procedures that are way more dangerous than this. I'm not saying nothing, things can't go wrong. And if we go from the position that, we just shouldn't do it, period, if we can basically do anything else and just, keep them as they are, then we shouldn't really care. But nobody is disputing that there are issues with circumcision. He's skipping the part where they're almost in every metric less severe than any form of FGM. Yeah, FGM, what is the mortality rate there was 0.01%. I'm curious about if there's any data. Mortality rate for female genital mutilation. Because, I mean, the countries where it's happening is not... Female genital mutilation results in an estimated 44,000 excess deaths per year across the countries where it is practiced, which is equivalent to a young woman or girl dying every 12 minutes due to the complication of the practice. Is there a man dying of circumcision every 12 minutes? That is insane. That was complication rate, not mortality. Mortality rate was even lower. That's true. Hold up. Even I misread that. That's just for complications. Mortality rate...
Fact.
Hold on with your facts.
Infections and complications. I've done so many videos on this.
And the incidence of fatalities over the 14-year review period was approximately 0.0012%. Like, again, I'm not here saying that, like, we should just circumcise boys because the risks are very low or whatever. I just said, that I don't like circumcision, whatever. But let's not compare the two. Obviously, FGM is way worse. Way worse. Especially because while you might have a loss of sensation for the men in the tip of the penis, women who get circumcised, I think they practically cut the clit off. Like, it can make sexual intercourse a painful experience for the rest of their lives. Like, it's insane to compare the two.
There's a fact. So there are your sources.
Nope. I guess that's just what it is. Honestly, this is such a weird claim to make.
No, it isn't actually.
How far do you have to dig to pretend like this is a real man's issue?
Oh, circumcision is not a real man's issue, guy.
No, again, this is what you guys don't understand. I literally just said, you idiot. I just said what is unhinged is Barbarossa's claim. I'm saying, like, how far do you have to go to say this is a real man's issue? The point is that you have to go so far as to claim that women are doing it on purpose, or woman or man or whatever, that they're doing it purposefully to infants, specifically so they would be more aesthetically pleasing to other women in the future. That's what is unhinged. That's what I'm saying is not a real problem. Circumcision is a problem, sure, whatever. But I'm being pretty clear here. That's why I'm saying it's dumb. I'm not talking about circumcision specifically. I'm talking about Barbarossa's claim. And you know this. You say I have a snarky tone in the video or whatever. Like, sure, I'm being snarky because I think it's stupid. I don't have any respect for this claim because it's not substantiated anywhere. It's stupid. There are areas where FGM has a 10% fatality rate. Not even kidding. 1 woman out of 10 in some areas that will get FGM will die from it. That's 10% compared to 0.0001% of men. Not even comparable. It's that's what I mean.
Yes. There you go. This guy is an absolute clown, an absolute bigot, an absolute waste of space. Okay? He just said that circumcision is not a man's issue.
No, I said infants being circumcised to be aesthetically pleasing to women is not a real man's issue. That is not a real man's issue. It really isn't. There's no data. All the data you showed, none of it supports that. This is completely ridiculous. That's what I'm hammering on, not circumcision itself.
What a pathetic piece of shit.
Sure, buddy.
Dude, circumcision is legal and normalized everywhere, even though it is medically unnecessary, extremely painful, extremely traumatizing, invades the bodily autonomy of children, male children. Okay?
And I'll just refer you again to the beginning of this part where I said it shouldn't happen unless it's medically necessary. Like, that's my position. Cry about it. We actually agree on most of what you just said. I just don't agree with Barbarossa's argument. Barbarossa's argument is insane. That's what I'm talking about.
and is tied to a lot of health issues, both physical and psychological, and is even tied to death sometimes.
Yeah, hold up, guys. I got a text from my girlfriend. I gotta check something. Be right back. Okay, sorry about this, guys. Teenage stuff.
So yeah, it is a male issue, actually, because this is only done to men. This is only legal and normalized for men. Yes, there are some countries where FGM is also legal, unfortunately, but from a worldwide standpoint, it is illegal in most countries, and people are very much against it. I'm also against it. I'm against both FGM and MGM.
Great, we agree, so I'll just move on. Oh, there's this one thing here. This is when I made my own survey, and I'm not gonna go over the entire thing. He is completely right here. A shield for men in talking about how because this thing was done privately and I didn't actually link it, like there's no way for him to verify this claim. That's totally fair. The reason I let myself make a survey like that and not cite it at all is because I'm responding to Barbarossa, who did not cite anything. I was totally fine doing my own survey because I was curious, and I decided to just share it for fun. No shield for men. If you want, I could find the post again and I could link it to you directly if you want it. It is true. I did not make it up, even if clearly, like, when it comes to citing sources, like, I completely agree, like, that, you know, like, there's no effort actually put into this. I was just doing it for fun. But again, what it does show is that, you know, the woman, at least the woman in my group, and it was a tiny sample, I know, but there were also women who were very sexually liberal. They were very sex-positive feminists, and that was their answers. If you want, I could find the post, I could send it to you, and you can use Google Translate to answer the answer, because it was in French as well. And what I'm guessing will probably happen there is that you'll just say, well, they're probably feminists and they probably hate all men anyway, so I'm not going to trust them. I mean, this is also why, like, the mere fact that you said that before about real sources that I actually cited properly means that at this point I can basically just cite anything and you'll have the same reaction regardless. So it's not so while I can agree that this is not a good source, it's not like you care if the source is real, though, because the moment the source doesn't agree with you, that's when you'll get mad, and that's when you'll dismiss it out of hand. So this was the main thing. I don't remember, like, what the rest was about. Oh yeah, that was about false allegations. And again, this is why I want to highlight that he needs to be talking. He needs to keep in mind, he needs to keep into account that the context in which I'm responding to this article is because Aidan Paladin used that study. So he can tell me that study is stupid. He can tell me whatever he wants with that study. I don't really care. What I was talking about specifically was how Aidan Paladin was misinterpreting it. One of her main claims was, well, in that study, They just asked a bunch of people how they feel about the cases to see if they thought it was a sexual assault. And that's not true. The four people involved, they're academic researchers, they're highly qualified for one, so it couldn't just be anyone, as Aileen Paladin claimed. And she says that, like, they didn't actually ask the opinions of police or whatever, and they did. It's like all the claims she made about this study were just like flat out wrong. It was super easy to dismantle. So that's the extent to which I use the study. The study itself shows between 2 and 10%. Those are like all the other studies that they accumulated within that study to talk about the topic of false allegations. And what they talked about is between 2 and 10% of allegations are false. And they themselves in their own study came to 5.9%. That's it.
If only 6% are deemed false, that automatically means that the rest, 94%, are automatically true by default.
Yeah, I'll give you that one. That was not something that was smart of me to say. It's dumb. Yeah, just because 6% are deemed true, deemed false, doesn't mean that the other 94% are. It just means that they haven't been proven to be false or true. Most of them, anyway. So that means that there's definitely a lot of margin here for error. Like, fine, I'll concede that point.
Think about the entailments here. That means that anyone can just make up baseless claims, right? And they have to be automatically...
Yeah, this is the other thing too. Like, if you look into it, they make a distinction between claims that are deemed false and claims that are deemed baseless. Baseless means that they just simply did not find any evidence that it either happened or that the person is making it up. When it's deemed false, is that they have concrete evidence that it was fabricated, and when it's true, it's that they have proof to put the guy in jail. The problem with sexual assaults, as we should understand, is pretty common sense. Like, they're extremely difficult to prove. I know this actress that I worked with a decade ago. I think like just a few months ago, she got someone that assaulted her to be guilty in court. He had assaulted her, but it was a process that took years. And it was extremely difficult because how do you get evidence for that? You know what I mean? Like, and especially because the person, as far as I understand, was like her ex-partner. If you're living with your spouse and then your spouse assaults you, how do you prove that? The only way you could do it, maybe for a woman, is if you immediately go to the hospital, immediately call the police, immediately get a rape kit. But a lot of people who are victims of sexual assault, they often feel shamed, they're often intimidated into silence, and that means that by the time they find the courage to talk about it, all the evidence is gone, or it's been too far for them to do anything about it or to bring any evidence to the contrary. In the case of the actress I'm talking about, the reason she was able to get her guy convicted is because the guy was also accused by other women because he was a serial predator. And that means there was bits and pieces of information from each woman, from each story, that drew a pattern that make it clear that he was guilty of what he did.
Be true, according to this guy.
Degree, although most would also have a master's degree and a PhD. So no, Aiden, it could... Okay, sorry guys. kids. Sorry guys, girlfriend, teenager, stuff to deal with. Not have been homeless people, even if it's not literally the people at the top of the page. The fact that you read the word researcher and simply thought, oh,
like I said, I don't care about what Aiden said.
Yeah, because again, this was who that was about. So you're kind of attacking me for how I'm interpreting this study, but you don't understand that I'm talking about it in the context of attacking Aiden Paladin. So if you don't care, you might as well just skip. That those studies came up with unreliable. So maybe Aiden should have read the entire study. It would have saved her some time.
Maybe you should have actually read the study and actually understood it. So
I did. You're the one who's not understanding it straight up. I will debate you on this.
let's just do that, right? So here's the study, Lisak et al., false allegations of sexual assault at an analysis of 10 years of reported cases.
The one thing I will say about the study, apart from him, that I agree that, like, considering you only have 136 cases, it's a relatively small sample size. The other thing we have to take into account with that study is it's specifically looking at false allegations on campus. So you're talking about a very specific demographic, young adults in college, lots of parties. So it's possible that in that context, there's a dynamic here between the people making the assaults and the people making the allegations and people making the false allegations. There can be a series of patterns here that's going to be very specific to the context of this study. So if you're going to refer to that study to talk about broadly false allegations, I agree that it's too niche. But it just means you take that into account when you look at it. And then you look at other studies, and then you see how the other studies do it, and then from all of them together, you kind of just take a more educated guess. Again, if you don't want to look at this study, which came to 6%, there's lots of different studies that make it between 2 and 10. That's also completely fine, you know?
All cases N equals 136 of sexual assault reported to a major Northeastern university over a 10-year period are analyzed to determine the percentage of false allegations. Of the 136 cases of sexual assault reported over 10 years period, 8, meaning 6%, are coded as false allegations. Now, anyone who already has some knowledge about anything notices exactly a couple of issues already in the abstract. So N equals 136. Again, is that enough statistical power?
Okay, well, the problem with that is that while it is a fair argument, you are picking and choosing when to apply it. You're applying it to that study because you don't like it. But if we go further, because I remember you doing this shit, I might actually lose it, I'm not sure. There is a part where he talks about how, they asked police officers how they felt about whether the accusations that they're investigating are false, and the numbers were from as low as like 5% to as high as 90%. And his reaction to that was like, well, I know it's a small sample, but still, I find that number very interesting. Okay, but if it's a small sample, you should just dismiss it out of hand. Especially considering that you're just asking police officers who may not necessarily have the training, who may not classify it, or just doing completely random educated guess. Like, you know this just as well. But you would cite this just because it agrees with you. It might be here, but I'm not sure. Sorry, guys.
Somewhat surprisingly, given her position as low patriarch cases polarized. The idea and belief minds it's actually
Social scientist. video, and 16 minutes in, I decided to randomly pause the video and check whatever she was talking about in that moment, and that was it. I don't care what her qualifications are.
Is where many reported cases do not move forward for a variety of reasons, such as a lack of evidence. A lack of evidence. Oh, so that means they were unsubstantiated.
Okay, so this is again like something like, listen, he's more than comfortable calling me disgusting. I'm more than comfortable calling him disgusting here. Because what he's saying is basically, well, if there's no evidence, then it's just as likely that they would lie than they would actually be truthful. You know the sentence, believe all women? It doesn't mean that, like, if there's evidence that they say it didn't happen, that you should still believe them, obviously. But what it does mean is that because so many actual reported cases of sexual assault never lead to a conviction, maybe we should try to more proactively investigate by starting from the premise that the allegation is true and then seeing what happens. Ultimately, if there's no evidence that they either made it up or that there's any truth to it, it's just going to be classified as baseless, and that's going to end it. If there's evidence that it was fabricated, then they go in that direction. But the likelihood that just because it's baseless, that means they're lying, that's only a reasoning you would have if you just want to take every opportunity to shit on women, like people who are in the Manosphere. So of course he is. But just because there's no evidence doesn't mean that they're just lying. I can take that reasoning in the exact opposite direction, and more often than not, I'm the one who's going to be correct, not him.
But we should just assume that they are true, regardless.
If only to investigate it to find out.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. By the way, this RAIN organization, I will do a future video on this organization because it's a feminist go-to source. It says right here, the majority of rape victims in the US are female. 82% of underage rape victims and 90%.
And then at the bottom it says men and boys also experience sexual violence. Funny how they try and include that as well. Oh, by the way, there's a guy washing my windows in the back. No, don't mind him. I'm sure he's very nice. But it's nice how they actually bring that up. Like the second thing they bring up, literally after their first stat, which he just cited, is that they're also trying to include men here. You would think he appreciates that, but no, like, because they say that first, that's why he's mad.
Percent of this sexual assault with an object. And let's look at these definitions. Forcible rape, forcible sodomy, sexual assault with an object, year 2000. Very recent
This
data,
one, I'm
of
curious
course.
about the next one.
And let's look at these definitions. Forcible rape, forcible sodomy, sexual assault with an object, forcible fondling. Do you see what is missing here? Made to penetrate.
Made to penetrate. Isn't that just rape? I understand that maybe like you want like something that's a little more inclusive. Forcible fondling would mean like you're touching them without their consent. Sexual assault with an object would mean that maybe a knife is involved, or maybe an object used to insert somewhere by force. Forcible sodomy would mean specifically in the butt. But forcible rape means specifically penis and vagina. So I would assume that if a woman rapes a man by forcibly inserting him into her, that would still count as rape. Like for me, that would count as as the same. Don't electrocute him. Well, but that's what I mean. Like he's making up a new category here, made to penetrate. That's just rape. To me, it seems like the same thing, you know?
The made to penetrate categorization of SA is absent in this report, which means it's under...
I guess it depends on how rape is defined. Maybe it is further down that page, but it's not like he shows
reliable.
it. So to prove with sufficient evidence that an instance of SA did happen when it's not even true is even more difficult, which is why the...
Yeah, but let's just assume that accusations are correct then, right? Because it's hard to prove something is false, therefore it must be correct by default.
Okay, you just didn't understand what I'm actually trying to say. Yes, like I agree that when I said like, well, is 6% of false, then another 94% is true. Like that was false. There's a lot of them in there that are going to be baseless, and baseless just means we can't ever know. And Then there's the parts that are true, and then there's some that might be false, but we just don't know because that just hasn't been classified that way, because no evidence has showed up. That's possible. But it's this is what I mean. I'm starting to lose my energy. Like, it's been 2 hours and 15 minutes. We're getting close to the same amount of time. But to be fair, we're much closer by skipping ahead. We're being more effective.
That's very interesting. Fucking idiot.
Vast majority of false allegations never result in a man being arrested, let alone accused or incarcerated. In a study looking back at 216 cases of false allegations, only 30... If he wants to see that study, it's in the description, and it's actually one of the most comprehensive studies on false allegations. This is looking at all the allegations that have already been proven to be false, and then it's breaking down what is actually happening here. And what is not happening is women just accusing men out of spite, getting them arrested, and ruining their lives. That does not happen. The vast majority of the time, the women who make a false allegation, you wouldn't think about it, but like one of the main reason is that they're trying to serve a different purpose. The reason most of them never name a suspect is because it's not who assaulted them that's important, it's the fact that they were assaulted that's important to their story. You know? And one of the prevalent factors, one of the main patterns in women who make up a story for that, is that you can tell it's a false story because once the lie of them being assaulted has fulfilled its purpose, they never bring it up again. That's one of the main tells that women are making a false allegation. So what it means, for example, is, I talked about that on Monday, but if, for example, you have a teenage girl who was late to school or skipped class, and then she's asked, why weren't you in class? And they know they're in trouble, and they say, I was gang raped. If that gets them off the hook in that moment, they will never bring up the assault again. The only people who will be bringing it up are, her parents and the police when questioning her, and then she'll get defensive and she'll start making more shit up until they figure out, okay, she's full of shit. But the point is, one of the main patterns is, once the lie is accomplished, they will not bring it up anymore. Whereas real assault victims have real trauma. You can see it through when they go to therapy, they can see it through friends and family, how they see them, the way they behave, if it's affecting them in some way. That's one of the main tales of a false allegation. And it's something very interesting, and it's one of the things that the study goes into. 39 of them, or 18%, ever named a suspect, but only 6 of them, or 2.7%, led to an arrest, and only 2 of them, or 0.9%.
This is out of a sample of 216. What about statistical power again? Okay, so again, like, if you're going to dismiss a study just because it has a small sample size every single time, I can just deem all of your own studies to have too small of a sample size. It's just as easy. Just as you said, you can't trust any of the studies that I have because it's probably feminist bullshit anyway. Same thing. Okay, same thing. We're operating with the maturity of children here when we do this stuff like this. Okay. Let's look at that. This is reported to the police. 216 were classified by the police as false allegations. However, some of these clarifications were based on police skepticism about victims who were mentally ill, about victims whose statements contained inconsistencies, and about victims who had been drinking or using drugs. Classifying a case as false on these bases, the researchers noted, violated the police agency's own classification rules. Those classification rules stipulate that a case can only be classified as a false allegation if there is clear and credible admission by the complainants, or where there are strong evidential grounds. Applying those agency rules, the researchers recalculated the frequency of false allegations and found that 67 of the 2,643, basically 2.5%.
Okay, so anyway, the point with that one here is, I think, like, when he was citing the false allegation data, those seem to be the exact same numbers that City Crusher used, and it's the same issue, which is that either it's 8% or it's 2%. It really comes down to how you decide to classify it. I don't really care. In 2% of cases deemed false, they actually had real strong evidence, and in the remaining 6%, they didn't have that strong evidence. So that's it. Like, if you want your data, if you want false allegations to be classified as, well, if we can't find any evidence that it happened, then we should classify it as false automatically, you're free to do that, but that's still completely arbitrary. When it comes to judicial procedures, the point of, when you declare someone guilty of a crime, whether it's assaulting someone or someone having made a false allegations to slander someone or to get them to ruin their lives or whatever, you're only going to find them guilty of these crimes in court if you have undeniable evidence. The evidence needs to be really, really strong. So that's why it's being counted that way. And what you need to understand is that even when proven false, even when you meet those standards, there are still far more men who get away with committing sexual assault, women for that matter. There's a lot more people getting away with committing, I'm losing my energy again. Let's try this again. There are way more people getting away with doing the crime than people actually being found guilty. And there are way more people being found guilty of real assaults than people being found guilty of crimes an assault they did not commit. And telling me, yeah, which is why some rapes are taken to the civil court and not criminal court, where the standard is it's more likely for it to have happened than not. That is true. In civil court, the standards are not the same as criminal court. That is absolutely true.
This actually met the criteria. Now, is this a reasonable criteria? No. Count, apparently. Okay. That is horrendous. That is nonsense. So, again, this is a nonsensical percentage based on a interesting than what this...
Oh, yeah, this is the one thing that he used. He must be like right there.
What
okay, look at this.
Quote-unquote research says.
Oh, sorry.
Police officers were asked what proportion of reported rape cases they believed were false allegations. Not all officers offered a numeric response, but those who did answers ranged from 5% of reports to as high as 90, with an overall mean response of 53. Okay, an overall mean response of 53% of false allegations, of rape cases being false allegations, according to police officers' opinion or perception. Now, again, granted, this is just opinion and perception from police officers, but I think it's interesting, and it might suggest...
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It might suggest stuff, You know for a damn fact that if those police officers had given a rate of 5 to 10%, he would say they're all woke feminists and they all hate men. You know for a fact that that's exactly what he would do. You can't look at all of the data I have and say, I don't believe it because it's small sample rates, you don't know anything about data, and then do the exact same thing. Just because you acknowledge that ultimately it does the same thing that you accuse the others of doing, you don't get to slip it in by saying, well, I still think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting perception to have. If you're going to do that, then you need to give the same standard to my data. You can say, well, I don't know about that. I think the sample size is too small. But it's an interesting argument anyway. Maybe we should consider it if we find more studies like this or something. Because otherwise, you're just a hypocrite. And I mean, the fact is you are. You are a hypocrite because that is what you're doing. Again, I could look you straight in the eyes, Shield for Man, and we both know if that number supported my argument, you would reject it out of hand. You're just completely biased. I have my own biases, but you're way worse than me. You are intellectually bankrupt, rather, even more so.
That it's not just 2%, okay? And again, this protected by definition, of the sexist legal coding.
Yeah, and this is okay. Well, you want to talk about it? I'll give you my own criticisms of that as well. There are laws. I mean, listen, it was still legal to rape your spouse in the States until like 20, 30 years ago. Like, there are people who are just a bit older than me today that when they were born, it was still legal in many parts of the West to rape your spouse. I think there's a problem with this is the same as circumcision. Sometimes you look at the laws and you realize that some of the laws are very outdated. They don't reflect the culture and the mentalities anymore, and you really need to update them. I think there was some place, I don't remember where, but there was a thing where they said that, I think it was in the States, maybe even in New York, where they said that the way they classified rape, it included penetration. So you can do anything to somebody, but as long as you don't penetrate, not a rape. Does that make any sense? At the same time, you have places, like I think it's the Nordic countries, I think it was specifically in Sweden. In Sweden, there were two things that happened over a decade ago, which had the far right in panic. The first one is that there was a refugee crisis in Europe. There were a lot of Muslims moving in. And then they saw the rate of sexual assault and rape skyrocket. And a lot of people thought like, oh my God, it must be the Muslim refugees. They're animals. They must be, like just going around raping everybody. What was really happening is that at around the same time, Sweden had just broadly, like very broadly, expanded their own definition of what constitutes sexual assault. And what that meant was that more women were coming forward to report their crimes, and that's all it was. To report their assaults, rather. So it is true that there are a lot of places where the way the law is designed, it is specifically designed in a way to classify rape when it happens to women, and it's not inclusive enough to talk about when it happens to men. That is absolutely true. And I am absolutely in favor of updating the laws to make sure that if men are indeed assaulted, we have the means to address it and bring, justice and prosecute.
Okay, and this is also the case in many other countries, but also in the UK. These men say women raped them, but the law does not agree.
It might have been in the UK where they say that there has to be penetration, but because the man is not being penetrated, it doesn't count as rape. That's because the law is profoundly backward and needs to be like drastically updated. That is totally a problem. I agree.
UK is a very feminist country. Just want to point that out. So in summary, this guy Duke It Out is a turd, okay, and I absolutely destroy him. Again, let's debate circumcision and whether or not it's a men's issue.
I already said it's a men's issue. It's just the men's issue is not what Barbarossa said it was. That's it. If you and I are in agreement, then that circumcision should only be done when it's medically necessary, and even then, what constitutes a medical necessity, it needs to be updated, and that means it may not ever be needed anymore. We're already in agreement. And although this is not something I explicitly say in my video, the fact that I say it shouldn't be done unless it's medically necessary should be all it takes for you to understand my position. Like, I really think it's that simple. At the same time, when I make fun of what Barbarossa makes out to be a men's issue, you also need to acknowledge that the claim he makes is completely false. There's no evidence that supports that. There is evidence that supports that women prefer circumcised penises, but that doesn't mean that that's the reason parents do it to their kids. It's not. There's no data for that. So can we just move on? Is there anything else you would like to debate? The main problem that I have right now, and because ultimately you're still doing the exact same thing that CD Crusher did, which is that when the evidence did not agree with you and you were not readily capable of debunking it, you just dismissed it saying, it's probably feminist, so I'm just going to ignore it. If you're just going to do that, well, I appreciate the honesty in the fact that like you just don't want to interact with any data that contradicts your worldview, but it also means that there's no reason to talk at all. If we end up talking and you do like keep bringing up circumcision as if I didn't say the same thing like multiple times, I'm just gonna think you're a complete idiot, frankly. And that was the video. So again, I can appreciate that the guy at least put a lot more effort into showing data, but like, let's be clear, a lot of times he was citing himself, citing his own posts, citing his own articles, citing his own videos, and a lot of the websites he was referencing were also like Manosphere adjacent. One of them was like No More Misandry Hate or something. Like that's definitely part of that. So I mean, I don't really care to go further on that. Like the other thing I will say, I might as well like go to the comments and see if they're refreshed. Hold up. Oh, there's 25. Did he respond to me? No, he still didn't. I mean, one of the issues that I was having, and I even took screenshots to make sure that it really wasn't just on my end. If you guys want, maybe go to the comments in this video. Like, don't start your own fight. Like, I don't suggest you do that. Just go look and see if there's a bunch of spammed comments from me talking about how he can reach me via my Discord or email that can be found in my channel bio. Because every time I made those comments, they would disappear instantly. As soon as I refresh the page, they would not appear. So I tried to say to him, like, we can talk, here's how you reach me, multiple times, and then it would just randomly get deleted. I know sometimes, this is something I discovered on my own channel, sometimes you have to set the comments to newest first, and that's how certain comments appear, and that's because of the moderation, I'm not sure. But if you see like a bunch of comments from me spamming, saying more or less the same thing, that means it's probably an issue on me. But if you don't see anything at all, that means maybe there's some issues with his moderation, or maybe every time I'm actually talking about specifically talking, he's deleting them for some reason. I have no idea. But I'll say the same thing for fans of City Crusher and Shield for Men, like, because I know City Crusher won't talk to me. Shield for Men, maybe he will. I'm still gonna wait for a response. If you guys want to debate anything, the Discord is in my channel description. You can join. Be respectful when you're on my Discord server. There's rules. You're going to see them when you come in. You have to be respectful of those. And if you want to talk to me directly, like, you still have the option to talk to me directly. Like, you can still DM me and I can see your message. So me right now, like I said, like on the video Monday, I'm still like working on a bunch of videos. Like, in fact, this morning before recording this, I recorded the voiceover for my next video on the main channel, and I've got a bunch of videos trying to release before the holidays. So I don't know if I'm gonna have any time to have any debates. But my channel is literally called Duke It Out. I am ready to duke it out with anybody as long as, you know, they don't spam the N-word or whatever, and they actually have arguments to make. The one thing, and this is again what I'm going to re-emphasize with the Shield for Men and City Crusher, is we need to have like a basic common agreement in just like, you know, being willing to interact with each other's sources. I'm willing to concede if I'm wrong. I'm willing to concede on things that I don't know about. But if I'm showing a source that doesn't agree with you and you just dismiss it out of hand because you don't like it, then yeah, like you're rhetorically bankrupt. There's nothing for us to discuss at all. You have your own worldview, your own vision of your own dimension, and it's not part of the world I live in. So, you know, I guess that leaves it at that. So anyway, what I see is that we still had like a decent amount of people in here throughout. Not as many interactions as last time. Maybe people they're just over it. I understand. If there was like a third guy somehow that ended up making a video part of that community, I think I would leave it be at that point. What I think I'm gonna do, I already wanted to do like a clipped section of the first review. Maybe I'll mix some of this reaction in it as well. We'll see. Either way, it might not be until the next year because I do have a lot of work to do. So anyway, well, thanks for everyone who tuned in. Thanks Teleme for being my budget Jarvis, as Ari just said. Thanks for everybody who tuned in. Apparently there was anywhere from 10 to 15, 20 people at any given time, and I'm not really sure. I feel like a lot of people are just watching and not saying anything, but that's okay. I appreciate you nonetheless. And that's it for today. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.